Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this installment of our 2021 webinar series for AASHTO's Committee on Environment and Sustainability. This is our second to last in this series. And today we'll be hearing from the Air Quality, Climate Change, and Energy Subcommittee. I'm Phil Burgoyne-Allen. I am one of the liaisons for the Committee on Environment. And just want to tell you a little bit about our platform here before we get started. So we're in Zoom webinar. It's very similar to Zoom meeting. You have the chat feature, which you can use to put an input, but we also have a Q&A box. So that's the main difference. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat option and a Q&A option. We recommend that you put your questions in the Q&A box just because it enables our panelists to take a look and answer them more easily, reply directly to the question askers, and you all will be able to see any questions that come in. You'll also be able to upvote those questions if there are ones that you think are particularly poignant or that you also want to see asked. So we'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, but again, our preference is to put your questions in the Q&A box if possible, but feel free to put your thoughts in the chat or share any resources, things like that people like to have going on. So I've got our agenda here, which I'm going to let the subcommittee chair, Amanda Peets, walk through. But I just want to quickly preview that our last piece of this installment is happening next Thursday on September 30th. And that'll be with the Cultural Resources Subcommittee. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. It's good morning from here on the left coast, afternoon to those in the east. As Phil mentioned, my name is Amanda Peets. I'm the administrator for the Policy, Data, and Analysis Division at the Oregon DOT. So my branch covers research, data, policy and planning, and the Climate Office. I'm the chair of the Air Quality, Climate Change, and Energy Subcommittee. AQCCES, as we lovingly call it, is the subcommittee of the Committee on Environment. And today's lineup is part of our annual conference. I'm joined here by Tim Wood, co-chair of the committee. Tim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I am the air quality technical expert for NEPA for the Texas Department of Transportation. I'm in their Environmental Affairs Division, and I am the lead air quality team, and I am your vice chair for this Air Quality, Climate Change, and Energy Subcommittee. And with that, I will turn back over to you, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Tim. So Tim and I will tag team facilitation today of the conversation. So you'll be seeing our faces a little bit more. I think we have a great lineup of topics here today and panelists. So we're going to start with some federal updates from EPA and FHWA. Then we have two sessions. The first is focused on consideration of greenhouse gas emissions and air quality and investment and project decisions. And then the other is on transportation electrification, obviously a hot topic around many state DOTs. As Phil mentioned, use the Q&A function or the chat, depending on what you feel more comfortable throughout today's meeting. To ask questions as we go along, we've really tried to reserve some time in each of these topics to take those questions and have that interactive discussion. And we've also peppered some of the presentations with some polling questions to try to make it a little more interactive as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So first up, we have our federal updates. And Laura from EPA, and then Cecilia and Mike from FHWA, they'll share updates related to the topics of our subcommittee. So climate, energy, and air quality in particular, but also some generalized updates. I'll have each presenter introduce themselves, and EPA is up first. So with updates and introductions, I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Berry. I work for EPA's Office of Transportation and Air Quality, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And today I have an update. I work primarily on transportation conformity and also moves. I will update you on some of those things, but I'm also giving you a general update of other things we're covering in our office. So we could go to the next slide. Yeah, and here's the list of things that I'm going to cover. It's sort of a grab bag of different topics. The first one is the upcoming OTAC regulations for cars, light trucks, heavy duty trucks. I have a brief overview of MOVES 3 updates, OTAC's state and local regulatory resources I just want to point you to some web pages that we have and some new resources that are there. We are going to be updating EPA guidance this year. So that's also in this, covered in this presentation. We have a new travel efficiency assessment method user guide. I'll also give you a DERA update and a Ports Initiative update, and I have contact names for those as well. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So this first one is about upcoming OTAC regulations for cars, light trucks, and heavy duty trucks. And again, I'm not the subject matter expert on this. It's just part of this presentation since I'm presenting on behalf of EPA. So President Biden's August 5th executive order has a goal that by 2030, 50% of new car sales will be zero emission vehicles. And that's the goal. And so in concert with this executive order, EPA proposed new greenhouse gas standards for passenger cars and light trucks for model years 2023 through 2026. Our public comment period on that proposal is open until September 27th, and the link is here. We will also be initiating another rulemaking to set standards for model years 2027 and after. And then EPA also plans to do rulemakings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and as well as other criteria pollutant precursors from heavy duty trucks through rulemakings in the next three years. There's a couple of them coming up. The first rulemaking is going to be final in 2022, which will apply to heavy duty vehicles starting model year 2027. And then also will set tougher criteria pollutant standards for the entire heavy duty sector, as well as some targeted GHG upgrades for some near-term model years. And then a second rule would set more stringent GHG emission standards for later model years. Okay, so next slide is about MOVES 3. And as you all know, we posted MOVES 3 to EPA's webpage in, I think, November of last year. And since then, you know, we made the official Federal Register announcement about it. Yeah, one slide up, one slide back, one more forward. Sorry. Since then, you know, that was MOVES 3.0.0, and since then we've had some little updates. We now have a new little update. We call them a patch to the model, MOVES 3.0.2. And this minor update fixes a number of small issues with MOVES 3.0.1, little things that we find along the way that we want to correct. It makes it easier to use for some applications. So we suggest please download and use this new version. If you haven't yet used MOVES 3, you may as well use the latest one, the one that has all the little corrections in it. Also, if you are modeling hoteling emissions at the default, which we used to call the national scale, because we made some corrections there, or if you're modeling non-road PM emissions. And so if you have already started work with MOVES 3.0.0 or MOVES 3.0.1, you can continue using that. There's none of these changes affect like transportation conformity analysis results. So, but if you haven't yet downloaded the new version, then use the new version. So our website here has the link of where you can download it from. And we also have a MOVES 3 update log where we describe what are the changes that we're making from version to version, all of the corrections we're making. And you can see that on our webpage as well. Okay, next slide covers some of the state and local regulatory resources that we have on our webpage. So this is a webpage that hopefully you guys are all familiar with. I know that AASHTO has regulatory responsibilities. So we have a state and local transportation resources webpage that has resources for implementing Clean Air Act programs related to SIPs, transportation conformity, I&M, and other programs. So some examples of documents that we included over the past year on this webpage are the MOVES 3 SIP and conformity policy guidance and the MOVES 3 technical guidance. So those two guidance documents, policy guidance really describes like when you use moves, when you use moves for SIPs, when you use moves 3 for conformity. The technical guidance covers how to use moves 3 for SIPs and conformity. We also have the moves 3 Federal Register notice. I mentioned that the model we posted it to our webpage in November, but the official release is with the Federal Register notice. And in that Federal Register notice, we establish a conformity grace period during which you can continue to use moves 2014. And that conformity grace period ends January of 2023. We also have a port emissions inventory guidance. This is a fairly new document that describes how you can create an inventory for all the different emissions sectors at a port. And we have this new VMT offset guidance and tool that is only applicable in severe ozone areas. And right now it's a little bit, we're gonna revamp our webpage to make that easier to find, make it more prominent on the webpage. But anyway, you can see all of these documents and others on our webpage. Okay, next slide, please, which covers the guidance that we'll be updating this year. With moves 3, some of our guidance was based on moves 2014, and so we're updating it. We're in the process of updating the PM hotspot guidance to reflect moves 3 and also reflect the fact that AirMod is now the required dispersion model. And you can no longer use Cal 3 QHCR. And there's other clarifications and updates throughout. So we will provide a guidance change bulletin, just like we've done in the past, to describe what are all the changes in the PM hotspot guidance. We've got a couple other guidance updates that we're going to be doing to incorporate moves 3. One is, similar to the PM hotspot guidance, is just this using moves in project level CO analyses. And that guidance is different from the PM hotspot guidance because PM hotspot guidance covers from the beginning to the end of the process, whereas the moves CO guidance just covers how you use moves, and then a different guidance applies for the rest of it. And we also have a using moves for estimating state and local inventories of greenhouse gas emissions guidance currently on our web, and we'll be updating that with moves 3 as well. Now, until we update these guidance documents, the current guidance documents are still valid. I mean, they are largely still applicable to moves 3. So there's more information about these on our webpage and on the contact for them. Okay, next slide talks about EPA's travel efficiency assessment method. And we do currently have a user guide on the web, but we are replacing it, and it's going to be any moment now. I think it's today that it's being posted, or maybe tomorrow, but it's really about travel efficiency strategies and how you go about estimating their emission benefits. So by travel efficiency strategies, what we're talking about in this guidance are strategies in these 5 categories that are listed here: employer-based transportation management strategies, transportation pricing strategies, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure programs, transit fare or service improvements, any kind of public transit improvement, land use, and smart growth strategies. So that kind of set of 5 things. And we've been doing a series of travel efficiency assessment method case studies with different state and local agencies, and in some cases non-governmental organizations, to evaluate what are the emission reduction potential of these types of strategies. We've done a series of case studies. We've done about 12 of them. And some of the feedback we got from our case study partners was, we really need a user guide to be able to do this. As I said, we have a user guide, but this one is going to be new and improved, and it includes all of the lessons that we learned in doing the case studies with these various partners. So our new user guide breaks it into steps: how you use moves, how you use the sketch modeling tools, etc. So yeah, it's going to be available on our webpage. Sorry, you could go on to the next one. Next slide is about the DERA program. This is Diesel Emission Reduction Act funding. This is funding that we have a program at EPA where we ask for applications for this funding that comes from Congress, and then we award it. So in 2021, We have award recipients that will be announced soon. I'm not sure exactly when. There's more information at our webpage, and also the contact person is Faye Swift. We also have coming up in 2021 October, there'll be DERA school bus rebates that will be open for people to apply for. American Rescue Plan and electric vehicle school bus rebates in underserved communities, also to open in November. And then also for 2022, our national request for applications will be open in December. So that's a quick update about DERA. Again, the contact person is there, that's Faye Swift. Okay, and this is my, I think, last slide, and it's about the Ports Initiative. The Ports Initiative is also a different contact person. Her name is listed at the bottom, that's Sarah Froman. But at our Ports webpage, a Ports Initiative webpage, we have a lot of resources that would help reduce diesel pollution through freight transportation planning and projects, including we have community and port collaboration resources, we have best practices, we have case studies, and these resources can help. There's some discretionary infrastructure funding programs that are now prioritizing projects that address climate change and environmental justice. And so some of these resources could help help applicants in meeting these new criteria. So for more information, have a look at the Ports Initiative webpage or contact the contact person, and that's Sarah Froman. I think that's my last slide. As I said, I'm the contact person for some of this, but not for others. So I'm sure the slides will go out after today, and people will have all these links. Thanks so much for including me in your call today.
Great, thank you, Laura. Great presentation. I think it's excellent to see the evolution of the MOVES tool over time, all of the work that you've done on user guides and resources for folks that I think is super helpful. I really appreciate you putting on the links too, because I think long-term after this meeting, it'll be great that people can find those things easily. So really appreciate that. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll shift over to an update from FHWA with Cecilia Ho.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, good morning. Thanks, Amanda. And thank you for inviting me to provide you with an update from Federal Highway. I'm going to cover some updates for the air quality program, and I know many of you are also interested in the noise program, so I'm going to just briefly cover a few updates on the noise program, and I'm going to share my time with my colleague Michael, and he will be providing you with updates, especially in the area of climate change. Next, please. So first off, I want to update you on the CMAQ toolkit. I think many of you are very familiar with the CMAQ toolkit. Since my last update from, I don't know, last year, I think, we have developed some additional tools, and right now we have about 12 tools that cover about 25 or maybe a little bit more than 25 individual project types. The newest tool is for the adaptive traffic control systems. And we are also in the process of developing a few additional tools, and actually the electronic tolling tool will be available very, very soon. We are expecting to have it posted on our website maybe next week, if not tomorrow. So it should be coming up very soon. And we also have planned to update all the tools with MOVES 3. If you have any questions, any feedback, or any recommendations for additional tool, please send those to our help email. I also included a link to the toolkit, and you can just go in and check out all the tools. One thing that I also want to mention is that we just posted a CMAQ input data dictionary. The data dictionary actually included about 350 different data sources that will be useful for emissions calculations, even though if you're not using the calculator. And we included all the data inputs that we use in the calculator toolkit. it might not have like the latest, you know, 1 or 2 tools, since, you know, we developed the data dictionary before those tools were available, but we have planned on, you know, do a regular update on the data dictionary. But I think for the most part, I mean, you know, for most of the tools that we have, and you can find the data input resources in the data dictionary. Next, please. We also have, I think many of you might have seen this already. We have 3 new fact sheets on our website. We are also developing some new fact sheets, including one that's talking about some additional emissions benefits on greenhouse gases for some of the CMAQ projects. So we are working on those, and once, you know, we have more information, or once they are available, we'll definitely let you all know. Performance measures, the CMAQ performance measures, I think many of you know that the second performance period will start actually next year by October 1st. That will be the start of the second performance period. So we are putting together a table with all the applicability like related to states and NPO that are subject to the CMAQ performance measures. And by regulation, we have to complete the applicability tables based on data as of October 1st of this year. So we are putting some final touches on those tables, and we plan on have these tables available on our website shortly after October 1st. I just want to point out some changes in terms of the data, in terms of, you know, the performance measure. One thing is that we are adding all the 2015 ozone areas into the tables. So, you know, that might be, you know, some new areas, especially, you know, for the ozone, they are subject to the ozone, the 2015 ozone standard. We are also taking off areas that have met their 20-year maintenance period. One thing I just want to mention is a pretty significant change is the population threshold for the congestion measure. The population threshold actually dropped from 1 billion to 200,000 at the start of the second performance period. So the tables will reflect all that information, and we're expecting some, especially some new NPOs, may be subject to the performance measure, especially for the congestion measure for the first time, and also they'll be subject to the CMAQ performance planning requirements also. So take a look at that once it's available. If you have any questions, just let us know. And I also want to thank all the state DOTs and NPOs that have helped us to review the table so that, you know, we can make the table as accurate as possible. So I mentioned about the start of the next performance period, and on that day, the first performance period for the full performance period progress report will be due on that day, and also the start of the second performance period, the baseline performance period report will also be due on the same day. We are planning on doing some training, especially related to the congestion measures because of the changes. So if you want to find out more about the performance measures, that's the link to the CMAQ website, and that's a page just dedicated to performance measures. Next, please. Some additional performance measure resources, and that is from the TPM office, and I just want to, you know, include that here if you guys want to find out more about, you know, performance measures and, you know, other information outside of the CMAQ performance measures. These are, you know, very good resources. For research, I think these two, I think many of you are pretty familiar with that. Actually, we just did a webinar on the Dana tool. That's the database for air quality and noise analysis tool, and also TNM8. The tools are now available for download, and I included the links here. I think you can download both, you know, the Dana tool and the TNM8 in the same place. But if you want to just download TNM8, you know, you can just go to our noise website. The second research that I want to mention is the methods of modeling vehicle activity and signalized intersections. I think I provided an update last year, and the report, I mean, the study is done, the report is available on our website also. Next, please. For air quality dispersion model, I think, many of you know that we have started this research a few years back, and part of it is we have a ongoing interagency agreement with EPA, and we collaborated with EPA on, doing a number of research related to dispersion model. And we have 3 state DOTs actually participated in testing EPA's AirMod beta and alpha source types, an outline and outline XT. The 3 DOTs are listed here: Virginia, Georgia, and New Mexico. We really want to thank you for your participation and all your hard work on, helping us to test the source types. The research is completed. The final reports and some of the data sets will be available later this year. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to release the information. So just stay tuned. The other thing that I want to mention is on a separate path, Federal Highway is also conducting a highway air quality dispersion model research. Can I go to the next slide? The idea of the research is, we're researching to see if there's an alternative to do dispersion modeling for highway applications. The model development and alpha testing is completed. We are conducting very rigorous performance evaluation analysis. We just started the beta testing for this model, and we are very, very grateful for the 4 DOTs that are helping us to beta test this model. So I really want to thank California, Illinois, Texas, and Virginia for helping us to beta test this model. The next slide. Okay, I think Laura mentioned about MOVES, and Federal Highway, through our resource centers, developed MOVES 3 training. I think we have conducted maybe 2 or 3 regional trainings already, and 3 will be conducting additional 3 more training sessions in the next 2 or 3 months. So we have 2 sets of training. One is hands-on training with class exercises. Is really we have to run the MOVES model and stuff. So because it is hands-on, so the capacity for those hands-on training is pretty limited. I think we are limited to about 20 to 25 participants per session. We also have an overview training available. We call it a boost for non-modelers. That is not a hands-on training. So for those type of training, we really don't have a capacity limit to that. So if you're interested in any of these trainings, please contact the Federal Highway Division offices, and we'll try to work with you and schedule those training. Very quickly on the noise program, I'm happy to report that TNM 3.1 is almost ready. We are very excited. We are expecting to release in the next few months, hopefully, hopefully sometime by November, but don't quote me on that. But we are working very, very, very hard to get it ready. And I included, some changes. We really think that, TNM 3.1 help address some of the bugs that we have based on the feedback from the users, we have identified, and we should try to address those bugs, and hopefully, especially on the runtime, and 3.1 should run a lot faster and better than 3.0. So if you're interested, go to our website. When it's available, it should be it should be on our website. Hopefully, very, very soon. Next, please. Okay, on research, I just want to mention that, I think some of you know that we are working on some TNM related tools, and some of them are already done. So we are kind of like, waiting in line to get them ready, posted on our website. One is the screening tool. The other is the automatic consistency test suite tool, and also the sound sample demonstration tool. So it should be on our website very soon. We also have completed 2 research study. One is on the noise analysis on multimodal projects, and the other is how to evaluate and quantify benefits of noise abatement measures. And for the second one, the cost benefits analysis framework development, the development part of it is done. So the final report should be available very soon. Training. I think many of you might know that we have the updated the traffic and construction noise course, and which is a web-based course. It's available through the National Highway Institute, and we are also developing a TNM training. We conducted a pilot training last year based on TNM 3.0. We are updating the training to incorporate the TNM 3.1 new features. So we expecting to have it available by the end of 2021. So stay tuned. I think that's my last slide. And these are the websites that you're more than welcome to come visit us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. I would just point you, as Mike then chimes into the conversation, if you can look over at the Q&A, and there's a few questions that have been placed there. I'm not sure we'll have time to answer those as part of this session. We have about 5 minutes left for this portion of the session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was having some connectivity issues, so let me know if anything doesn't come through. So anyway, thanks for the invite today, and I'll try to be brief. I apologize for not having slides today, but I'll just go over a couple of high points. So my team works on mainly climate change, sustainability, and greenhouse gas emissions. So as you can imagine, given the administration's priorities, we've been pretty busy recently, and there's a lot of things that are kind of being stood up, and a lot of programs, a lot of policy. So there's just been a lot of activity, and so I think one of the issues, one of the things that we've been really working on a lot is providing technical assistance to the Hill on both the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then also on the what I guess is commonly called the reconciliation bill. These bills have a lot of provisions in them, new programs, new funding programs for greenhouse gases, for electrification, for alt fuels, and for resiliency, and some competitive grant programs. So there's a lot in there, and I'm not going to be able to get into like the ins and outs of some of those things, but I think that given the I guess particularly the bipartisan bill that effectively is our reauthorization bill, I think that there's probably going to be some quick turnaround things should that become effective, should it be passed. And of course, I know that there's a lot of uncertainty with that as well, but we're keeping an eye on some of those major provisions, because if they are passed, they're going to be large kind of new programs to stand up. So I would just stay tuned to see the extent to which that's passed, and if so, then there's going to be more. If that is passed, there's going to be more in this reauthorization bill that has to do with climate change and related sustainability and alternative fuel type infrastructure issues than ever before. I think that's very safe to say, and I think it's I think we're excited about the opportunity that may provide, but of course it's all subject to Congress being able to find a path to passage. So anyway, so I'll just mention that, because there's a lot of things going on in that area. The other I would just mention is that in April there were a couple things that came out. One was, and this was kind of all connected to the Earth Day events, and hopefully a lot of you were able to see that or heard about it. But the first thing we did was we announced the 5th round of the alternative fuel corridor designations. So we've been doing this is the 5th year we've designated corridors. I'm sure that all of you have in your states have some mileage associated with alt fuel corridors. So just alert you to that. There's a dedicated portion of our website that's just devoted to alternative fuel corridors, where you can see maps and related resources associated with that. So we were glad to be able to designate that, and we were glad that the secretary actually helped announce those designations. So that was that was a nice thing to see. The other things that we released kind of in conjunction with that, it was a I guess we're calling it a mini report, or it was a paper that was associated with funding sources that could be used, federal funding sources that could be used for the installation of alternative fuel infrastructure. And so there was basically, we went through the eligibilities in the federal aid highway kind of program and looked for where there were opportunities to be able to say that that type of activity of installing infrastructure for alt fuels would be appropriate for those programs. And then we also put out some clarifying kind of guidance on the use of the right-of-way for alternative uses, and which includes things like renewables. So if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to look at that. I think that we're trying to find a path through the kind of complicated maze of competing and sometimes difficult requirements regarding how that can be done in different states, and how solar panels could be, kind of deployed along highway right of way. And I know that a lot of you have been able to kind of find a way to do that. And I also realized that in some cases, the path may not be as predictable as would be desired. So I think part of this piece of work that was put out was attempting to try to clarify some of the paths that are available. And I think the other thing I would just offer is that, if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, I would encourage you to reach out to your division office, and also you can and reach out to us so that we can try to work through if there are any issues in that regard. I do know that the administration really wants to try to encourage that type of activity to the extent that it's, of course, appropriate and legal and all that. So anyway, I think that, we want to certainly encourage that. So those were things that came out in April. Not new news, but still important news. The other thing that that's been going on that I know is getting at least some level of interest from both the state and the MPO communities is that we published in the regulatory agenda that we're working on reestablishing a greenhouse gas performance measure under the Transportation Performance Management Program. So this is a something I can't really talk a lot about because of the restrictions regarding talking about regulations that are being developed. But what I can do is I can point you to the notice that was on the regulatory agenda. That's about as far as I can talk about. So, but I think just alerting you to the fact that is out there, and that it's in development is something that I thought would be of interest here. And I think maybe just in the interest of time, I may stop there. But anyway, a lot of things going on. There's I think just we're trying to keep up and do our best, and hopefully there's going to be some more concrete things I think to talk about in the near term, but not right now. So anyway, that's all. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. Appreciate all your thoughts there. So I want to thank the panelists here, Laura, Cecilia, and Mike. Really interesting to see kind of what's going on, what's priority at the federal level and what to kind of expect on the horizon. So I also appreciate Mike kind of the preview, even though I can't say a lot. I do think that's really helpful to hear from this audience. We are a little over time, which is fine, but we don't have time, unfortunately, for doing the live Q&A portion for this session. I encourage those panelists to look at the Q&A, and then you can click on the type answer portion and then fill that in. And now I'll turn it over to Tim to kick us off for the next session.
Thank you, Amanda. So yeah, we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to keep this introduction quick. We are the subcommittee on air quality, climate change, and energy. And as such, we've seen that one of the biggest concerns to come lately from both the public and from regulatory agencies are greenhouse gases. And regulatory agencies discussion first is, would be regarding CEQ and some recent actions they took with regards to pulling their old draft guidance and suggesting that they're going to revise some old guidance, and then some methods by which we might be able to do some analyses in the future. So it's very pertinent to the work we do and as air quality, and specifically at our project level. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our very own chair, Amanda.
Tim. Thanks, Tim. Long time no see. So I'll be doing the first presentation here on this topic, just diving in a little bit on kind of peeking in on what Oregon DOT is doing and our work experimenting with applying a climate lens to investment decisions and really how we're trying to inform project selection processes. It's fairly new for us, and we're already starting to learn from what maybe didn't go so well, but it's already led to some changes in the ultimate decisions that we make as a DOT. We started this work in response to an executive order directive from our governor, where she really wanted to see greater transparency around our investment decisions and help ensure that we're explicitly considering greenhouse gases as we make those decisions. This was also timed well in that we created a climate office around that same time, which really was in recognition that the DOT in general plays a major part in polluting and greenhouse gas emissions, and we really need to reshape how we do business. Next slide, please. Given that the executive order focused on the statewide transportation improvement program, our major, which obviously most of you know, is what really houses our federal project investments. We started by breaking down those major decision points within the STIP, and we broke it down into 3 parts. So phase 1 is really where we take the time to allocate funding between program areas. So we separate out funding to what goes to bridge and pavement versus what goes to, say, biking, walking, or public transportation. So that's that project allocation phase. And then phase 2 is looking at project identification, really where we're trying to narrow the list of potential projects from 150% to the 100% list of what we can actually fund. And then the third phase is the final STIP project list. You'll see on this slide that there's dates. While the executive order requirement was to develop a process by June of this year, so basically all we had to do by June was set a process in place. But instead, we actually applied that process live because we want to make sure that we're influencing the next round of projects. Oregon, like most DOTs, we do our project selection years in advance. So if we miss this window, we'd not really be influencing projects until 2028. In Oregon, we have a very active climate stakeholder group, and so that really would not have been palatable to them that we're not applying it until 2028 and beyond, which means that we're really building the bus as we drive it. And I had to come up with a good multimodal analogy there. All right. As we embarked on adding a greenhouse gas lens to investment decisions, we created a trade-off analysis framework, because we recognize that we never make decisions considering only one goal. So we added consideration of things like climate adaptation, congestion relief, social equity, multimodal mobility, safety, and state of good repair. Those are all shown and defined on that slide. But you might wonder, why these goals, why not others? That's because these ones generally were in our statewide policy plan and articulated in our agency vision. To apply the framework, we had to establish a comparison point, or basically a baseline. We chose the previous STIP as the baseline, so the 21 through 2024 STIP. We first culled through the STIP document itself to mine for information. However, the STIP document is really a financial piece, not really a project accounting tool. So it didn't have the level of detail that we really needed in that. And we really needed to look at more details that was in there, because just a general project description might just say, hey, it's a bridge project, but there might be more pieces or elements to that. So we really needed to define, like shown here on the left, what type of bridge project is it, and then what other pieces does it have in it. So we pre-populated some information from the STIP that we could call out, and then reached out to our project staff to confirm the details and then readjust as needed. So each project, kind of as I was alluding to a second ago, isn't just, say, a bridge project explicitly, it has several different elements. So if you look at project A here, it's marked as a bridge project, but also an expansion that adds safety features and includes a bus pullout. So we're trying to capture all of what we call the attributes of a project so we can credit those. And it was really to get a sense of the scale of investment as well. So you'll see there's little dollar signs, not just the check boxes. So it's not enough to just say, hey, the project included a bus pullout, so a transit. We want to know how much money was actually spent on that transit improvement. With this information, each attribute was then attributed positively or negatively to an outcome area. So if you look at something like road capacity expansion, and then you go to the chart in the middle, that might be good for congestion relief, but maybe negatively impact climate change mitigation or state of good repair, because you're basically adding more infrastructure out there that you have to maintain. We also then took the dollar amount and then we associated that with the subtraction, so negative, or addition, meaning positive, benefit towards that outcome. So in the end, what we did is we compared basically how much money is going into moving forward or trying to achieve the various outcome, whether that's GHG reduction or safety. So how much money are we spending towards that outcome? And then comparing that to how much money should we be spending on that outcome? And that how much should we be spending? We really tried to pull from our other statewide plans that said, what's the total need? And so the plans say over 20 years, here's the total need. We basically annualized that and said, okay, if we were to meet that need, here's how much we would be spending a year. So the results, not surprisingly, showed that the needs, which are the red bars, far outpaced available funding, which is the blue bars. So obviously needs a lot greater than what we have funding to cover. And so while that can be like wah wah, it also is very informative, because what it helps to highlight is maybe areas where we've historically underfunded certain outcome areas. And so in this case, we see the largest gap for greenhouse gas mitigation between what we're spending and the need, but also for social equity and multimodal mobility. The baseline analysis also told us how our investment buckets help or hinder some of those desired outcomes. So for example, greenhouse gas mitigation, top left there, was most positively impacted by investments in non-highway. So think about biking, walking, and public transportation. But it's negatively impacted by capacity expanding enhanced projects. So we call enhanced projects are ones where we're adding features to the system, so basically expanding capacity. Another one to look at bottom center is safety. And that really was benefited by all program areas. And I think that helps to demonstrate how our DOT has really ingrained safety across all that we do. And this framework really helped us to understand where we might put more money to boost outcomes that needed to be furthered. So moving beyond the general findings to the specifics, here's the results from the baseline. The results are shown in terms of performance relative to the outcome. And we demonstrated those by letter grades that indicated how well our spending matched the needs. So the recipe for creating those letter grades was really looking at that red and blue chart that I showed earlier, with just a dash of some subjectivity added. This then became the comparison point for different funding scenarios to see if they would perform better or worse than the status quo. And here's the funding scenarios. They're shown in comparison with the baseline. While the analysis produced quantitative actual numbers, what we wound up showing to our commission, who ultimately makes the STIP decision, is more of a qualitative kind of, what I would say more a consumer report type piece, so that we don't overwhelm them with information. And also, since we're roughly, we don't have a lot of project level details at this point. There's a lot of assumptions behind it. I think specific numbers can get us in trouble. So this color graphic really helped the commission to really talk through things. So a little bit on what the colors mean. The dark green box denotes a notable improvement, while light green is modest, and a similar scale is used for red, noting the decline. And then gray, ones that aren't colored at all, basically means little change from the baseline. Only scenarios that significantly shifted funding around, like scenario 2, shifted around 200 million towards non-highway, led to notable improvements, but also had notable decline in things like state of good repair, because that money came from our Fix-It program over to non-highway. So you're seeing the trade-off of where you put money and take money away. Go ahead and click again. I didn't realize that was animated. Thank you, Phil. Ultimately, our commission opted for directionality. So we didn't make a huge improvement, but we did show that we're trying to move in the direction of. So we saw progress towards climate, congestion, and equity and some multimodal outcomes. And that's what we agreed to in the final scenario shown on the right. The chart at the bottom left of the slide shows that emission reductions that we actually need to achieve. So again, giving ourselves a letter grade, we had a D-. The new funding mix of modest improvements bumps us all the way up to a D. Yeah, so it sounds like a really sad story, but don't lose hope. It's still a significant step. Even with this modest progress, we're still investing nearly 60% more of federal funds in biking and walking. So that's nothing to sneeze at. Next slide. With the phase 1 milestone complete, Climate Office is transitioning to phase 2. So this is really, how do we inform project selection? So now that the allocations are between programs, how do we influence what projects actually get selected? The team's working to assess which projects fall basically on the good side of the ledger, those that reduce emissions, the bad side, those that increase emissions, or those that have little impact. We've been consistent in our messaging with internal and external stakeholders that we'll still have projects that move forward that are in the red. And that's okay, because the projects needed for safety or other reasons. So it's not going to trump all projects. Like if a project shows bad for GHG, that still means we're going to move forward if it's the right answer, right? But the goal is on a whole that we're trying to reduce emissions overall and really make sure that we're providing the right information to narrow in the project list. All right, next slide. So techies, this slide's for you. See, we have a lovely, beautiful, complicated looking mathematical formula. The phase 2 approach really mimicked the initial work. So we collected project level data. We did this on all projects being considered as part of the 150% list. So in other words, we're looking at more projects than we have funding for in an effort to narrow to the optimal mix of projects that we can actually fund. Optimal being climate friendly. If you could go back still, sorry. Although these, one more, back. Yeah, although these projects have some definition, this is prior to field scoping. So each project is assessed really at the attribute level in terms of advancing or challenging the goal. And we ultimately want to report out to regions at the programmatic level, but the influence is at the project level. So in addition, we recognize that programmatic investments are not black and white. So projects are multifaceted in a way that we can't just say that safety projects are safety projects and all need to move forward. We need to kind of look at what those impacts are for all types of projects. We're currently in the process of meeting with programs in regions to go over the results. Scores are produced from the analysis, but kind of like I talked about in the first phase, we're not really showing the numbers as much. We're using more of the sliding scale that's shown here on the screen. And at this time, we don't really have specific requirements for the results. So if we sit down with a region and we say, okay, here's the results of your project, they're like, okay, great, thank you, bye. That's what they can say. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to influence things. So I'm confident that we're making some progress there. And then we're getting to fewer emissions overall. The other output of this analysis, if we can go back, sorry, is to identify mitigation opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for projects that challenge the goal. So at the end of the day, we can demonstrate that we're complying with the governor's executive order, and I think influencing our decisions because we're applying that lens to influence the projects that move forward and making modifications as well to those projects, because what we're also doing is having some mitigation options flagged for any project that's in the red. So if it's challenging the goal, we say, okay, here's options to get that closer to the green or slide that along that scale. And then lastly, we're just in the process still of the phase 2 work, as I mentioned. Phase 3 will be a counting of all emissions. And then beyond the STIP cycle, what are we looking for? Improvements. So we're looking for opportunities to get projects identified sooner in the process that help reduce GHG. So instead of applying the lens after potential projects have been identified, we look at ways that greenhouse gas emissions are part of how projects are identified in the first place. This gets the idea of more of a strategic and not just opportunistic approach. So strategic is looking for investments that could move the needle on GHG. So basically projects that are chosen for the purpose of reducing GHG to advance those goals. Whereas I still think opportunistic are needed because we're going to have some other projects that are identified for other reasons. And where we can, we should look for opportunities to mitigate those. As we've been doing the phase 2 work, it's been a little challenging in that when we identify those mitigation opportunities, sometimes we don't always have the funding reserved to act upon those mitigation approaches. Most of the funding has already been programmed. So we're looking at opportunities for holding back some funds and supporting it that way. So that's it for me. Happy to take any questions if there's time, Tim. Otherwise, feel free to move along. Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and move it along for now, and we'll take any questions at the end of this session. And if we have to push back our break, 5 minutes, we will. But thank you. That was very both progressive and inspirational with regards to how much you've been able to incorporate climate and GHG into your process for analyzing projects. With that, let's look at actually analyzing projects under NEPA, really. And we can talk to Mr. Peter Wasco of Minnesota DOT that can help us understand more of how they used the ICE tool enhancements to do that.
Good afternoon, everyone. You can go on to that very next slide, Phil. MnDOT started this road probably back starting now in 2017. We may be a little unique is actually we have a state environmental quality board, and they started to look at that time the requirement to put in GHG into the state process. Working with them, their answer to possibility on tools was to use moves. Now, we all know, obviously, moves is a really nice tool. However, the thought of having to run moves for every single job and the cost and time that would have been reflected in that was a little concerning. So we started working with the FHWA Resource Center on availability of tools and started to look at the ISA tool at that time. As we were moving along in terms of reviewing ICE, the decision was made by our senior leadership folks is to not just necessarily do this on an EAW, which is our state EA, but also on most jobs. The decision was made that we actually have an early summary notification, which is a job that would be a really, really small in terms of environmental work and stuff like that. We also put a caveat that we were looking for ones that were more than $1 million, as well as for the folks that have used ICE, there are limitations in ICE as to what it can actually do. So MICE was developed on, at that time, it was the first version of ICE. It subsequently has been updated since, but we elected to modify the base ICE and include the Minnesota specific fleet and our emission factors based on that fleet. We also had a lot of requests to on our jobs to really look at build and NOAA build to see what that direct was. So we wanted an easy way of a project proposer to use use mice in a efficient way for it. We also added custom inputs for lighting. We actually have moved now to all LED lights. We symbolized the lane width, so it's kind of defaulted in. We changed the duration of lane closures during construction to months rather than years. Obviously, in a snow belt state, our construction typically will stop here in a month or two, maybe 3. But it seemed to us that it made a lot more sense in terms of months rather than 1.2 or 1.3 years. We also decoupled the initial construction and any subsequent resurfacing. As I showed in the previous slide, pretty much every single job that we have runs a mice analysis. So therefore, it really was not, in essence, required in there that we wanted to add an assumption in there for it. And then obviously for us, we have some Minnesota specific mitigation tools. And these are some quick screen shots just to give folks an example for it. This is actually a screenshot within mice. It's just some arbitrary numbers and stuff for it, but it gives an idea that a project proposer or someone that's using mice, we actually have a template table and text that go with it. So once you actually have completed your mice analysis, you can actually just typically grab the results and cut and paste that within the document. We've also added, and this is actually going to be added in a new version that we're actually just coming out with, but there was obviously some things that were missing in terms of tree loss or tree gained. Grassland that now is blend top or something like that, or forests that are converted to grassland. So this has the ability, it's done by inkers, and it can either be a positive or a negative number, as in maybe you are going to add additional trees or additional forest into it. And then obviously we wanted to make a note that we have a no net policy for wet land. So certainly with most jobs that may have some wetland increases or decreases, we're either going to add to a bank or take that back out of a bank. And then this is actually a screenshot for the lighting. You can see on the left-hand side, it's your typical ice. We've kind of grayed out. We don't use the sodium light anymore. So we actually have average number of LEDs. And then we worked with our lighting folks to actually determine what that typical wattage for that LED was. And then on mitigation, this actually reflects also an upcoming update, but for Minnesota, we use biodiesel. So that was actually hard coded in. And then for our update, we're actually going to tungle the snow fence and wing plows as being really, no into yes. So as I mentioned, we actually are still on version 1. We have a version 2 that I actually do have on hand. We're actually going through some review with our consultant on it, but we've updated now the emission rates. We got new fleet data was based on 2019, which was the most current. There was some concerns I think we had due to COVID and how that could affect affect the fleet. So we elected to use 2019, and then using some of the EPA tools, had the consultant actually bring that volume up to 2021. And then MOVES 3 was actually ran to develop all the emission factors for all the different speed events. We added roadway land use, as you saw, into roadway inputs. We actually also added US tons. It sounds like our state environmental board likes the idea of using US tons. So the tool will actually be able to compute both US tons or metric tons. And then we obviously added a bunch of additional notes and hints based on the feedback that we've received for it. And that is my contact information. And thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. And actually, this is going to be, I think, a very useful tool for a lot of state DOTs as we move into compliance with the updated CEQ requirements, which are future pending, but it looks like at this point inevitable. So let's go ahead and move then to our last speaker, and that is with Cambridge Systematics, and that would be Chris Porter, and is going to be discussing a TRB effort on project level analysis regarding this as well.
Great, thanks, Tim. So before I jump into this new NCHRP project, some of you may be wondering, well, whatever happened to the last one we were doing, the 2556 project, which was the guidebook for state DOTs to estimate and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that is working its way through the publication process. I was just responding to some questions from the editor this morning, so hopefully it'll be out in the next couple of months. And thank you again for everyone who participated in that. This will be a great follow-on piece to that, but diving much more into environmental reviews and how to consider both greenhouse gas emissions and climate effects. We've got some good team members here that you can see on the slide. I'm just going to go into the overview of the project. So this is, so we're developing a handbook for state DOTs, as I mentioned, and we're looking at defensible methods that clearly disclose impacts, help DOTs in responding meaningfully to public comments, and also informing mitigation efforts and decision-making. So this is not just intended to support the National Environmental Policy Act requirements, but on any state requirements as well. I mean, we're not going to be looking specific. I mean, we are doing reviews state by state. The handbook is not going to be state specific, but it is broader than just NEPA in terms of sort of its intended use. So I guess we have a couple of poll questions just to make sure people are awake and engaged, and I guess Phil can pull those up. The first one, has your agency included consideration of any of the following in recent environmental reviews? Quantitative assessment of GHGs, qualitative assessment of GHGs, consideration of the effects of climate change on a project, mitigation or adaptation measures, consideration of equity issues related to climate, or if you haven't looked at any of that, there's an option for that as well. So I'll just give folks a bit of time to respond to that poll question.
Yeah, Chris, we've got answers coming in. Can you, on your end, see the results?
No, I'm not seeing them.
Okay, I think once folks answer and I end the poll, then it'll display the results.
Sure.
All right, we've got 50 responses, so yeah, there's more trickling in, but give folks another minute. All right.
So it looks
There
like,
you go. You should.
yeah, I got it up. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Phil. Across the board, for the most part, it looks like about 40% said they have considered these things. Equity is a little bit lower. It's around just a little bit under a quarter. I think that's going to be an issue of important focus because it's certainly getting a lot of interest these days. So this is good to know. So thank you for that. We have another question, which is, how do you feel about your agency's capacity for considering greenhouse gas emissions and climate effects? I know there's a lot wrapped up. I mean, emissions and the climate effects are not the same thing, but just in general, the first choice is you anticipate a need to consider these effects, but you have adequate tools, data, and resources to do that already. The second option is, yes, you do anticipate a need, but you could use some assistance with appropriate tools, data sources, or assumptions. And the third option is you don't anticipate a need to consider greenhouse gases or climate in the near future in the project level analysis.
I'll give folks another few seconds here and then I will share our results.
Great. All right. So it looks like, yeah, most people responded saying they do anticipate a need. A few folks think they're on top of it, and most folks are looking for some resources. So I guess it's a good thing we're doing this project, and maybe a few folks that won't need to do that. And then our final poll question. And so this is anonymous. This is not going to be reported back to your management. In your view, when should agencies be expected to quantify greenhouse gas emissions? The options are for as many projects as possible, for example, any project with an EIS or an EA, only for major projects such as capacity expansion or investment. The third option is some sort of hybrid major project and maybe some certain types of other projects. I don't know what those might be. And then the fourth option is you don't think they should be quantified at a project level, but only at a system planning level. All right, give people a little bit more time and then Phil can show the results. All right, so we have definitely a kind of a diversity of opinions here, ranging from as many projects as possible to some sort of hybrid of that to system planning level. So this is going to be an interesting topic that we're going to get into as we get into the guidebook. So thank you for all that. And just moving on to explain what we'll be doing. The project tasks, this is sort of a standard NCHRP approach, review what's out there, look at existing methods and tools. Then we're going to go out and collect stakeholder and community perspectives, both from DOTs that are doing this and also from community-based organizations. We'll have 2 virtual peer exchanges, one focused on adaptation and one on mitigation. Then we'll develop the draft handbook. We will pilot the handbook with at least one state DOT. And so I will say that we are going to be sending around a screening survey in the near future, probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks, to every DOT to ask just a few questions about, similar to the ones we just asked, with a little bit more detail. And we will be following up with some of you for more information. But we hope that every state can complete that screening survey. I know you're busy. If you could just complete one per state, that would be really helpful. And that survey will also ask if you're interested in being a pilot subject. So, if you're really excited right now and want to chat me and say that you're interested, you can do that too. But please keep an eye out for that survey. Next slide, please. All right, I won't spend too much time on this, but we're just reviewing all the federal guidance. We're reviewing state requirements and guidance that are out there. We're doing a sample of environmental documents to see what's in that. And then we'll be looking at in more detail at evaluation tools on mitigation, climate change, and equity. Next slide, please. A few of the key considerations we'll be looking at: different project types and analysis scales and what's appropriate to each, qualitative versus quantitative, the scope of emissions covered, how people characterize climate change effects and risks, again, how equity is considered. We're looking at different stages of planning and how mitigation measures are considered. And finally, what sort of conclusions are drawn and how those conclusions are used. Next slide. This just shows, we are looking at the whole spectrum of planning and project development, not just sort of the traditional, you get down to the project development, final design, and construction, where you get into NEPA, project level review, and environmental compliance. That'll be a major focus, but we also want to look at the whole spectrum, starting with planning level environmental review and how that can be carried through with that information to support project level review. Next slide. Okay, and this is clearly going to evolve over time. We do want to look at, again, different types of projects, tools and methods. We'll introduce some case studies, implementation challenges, etc. Next slide. So again, I mentioned the initial outreach. In addition to the states, we'll also be reaching out to serve community-based organizations, the two peer exchanges, and then the pilot, which I mentioned already. Finally, the schedule, that initial outreach and workshops will be done this fall, the peer exchanges will be next spring or early 2022. Draft handbook over later 22, the pilot going into 2023, and then the final deliverables. So, we're looking about a 2-year time frame from now in terms of finalizing this, but hopefully we'll be able to share some interim information as we go along, because we know this is a rapidly moving topic. All right, I'm done, and so happy to answer any questions or let other people answer questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that presentation. I actually found some of those responses to be a little surprising, so that is very good and timely to have those questions. We're actually back on time, and as far as Q&A, all the questions have been answered except for one, which was just recently submitted, and let's see who that one is for. Can someone at FHWA or US DOT give us a reasonable assurance that the GHG guidebook will remain guidance for the state highway agencies versus becoming policy at some point? And feel free, FHWA, if this is something that you need time to answer, you can type your answer in at a later time. Okay. As for one of the other questions that was asked, which I think is very pertinent, was with regards to that Minnesota ICE tool, and they had asked whether it was going to be available for others outside of Minnesota, and the answer was yes. If there's any further elaboration you want to add on to that, Pete, feel free. But I think that's going to be a very useful tool as we try and comply with this upcoming CEQ guidance that we're all waiting with bated breath on, which is going to require project level GHG analysis again, most likely.
Yeah, we have no problem sharing it. Like I said, it has a lot of enhancements. We have our own users guide, our own guidance for it, but certainly have no problem sharing the tool. It's actually available on min.'s web site now. So folks can just download that and the user guide. Obviously, if folks would want to use in their state, because it's got our fleet mix in it, they would certainly want to repopulate that for it if they wanted to reflect their own fleet mix. But yeah, more than willing to share it.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that being said, Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you real quick if you want to close out the first part of this.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim. So I want to thank all the presenters thus far. I think done a great job giving an overview of what's happening at the federal level, some kind of best practices from Minnesota and elsewhere. And of course, really interesting to see kind of the outcome of that research. It was interesting, as Tim said, to see the poll today and kind of get some responses. So with that, we'll take a break. We actually created a pretty healthy break here in that we have about 20-25 minutes for the break. We'd like you to sign back on around 2:40 Eastern time, and we'll start promptly at 2:45. Welcome to stay on the line and just take yourself off camera and mute yourself, or sign off and sign back on. We hope to see you back here where we'll get into transportation electrification. Thank you so much. Well, hello and welcome back for those of you that are joining us again after our break. And also welcome to those who are new to the session that have joined us to talk about transportation electrification. Really exciting and burgeoning topic among DOTs and the state as a whole. We heard from EPA earlier about President Biden's goals for transportation electrification. So it's clearly something that leadership at the highest level is pushing towards, and that we as state DOTs really needed to grapple with and consider. So we have a really great distinguished panel here to talk with you today about transportation electrification needs, challenges, and opportunities. We'll have each presenter introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they're up to. Generally, we're going to have the presenters introduce themselves so you hear a little bit more about who they are. And we'll kind of proceed through with about 10 minutes for each presenter to talk about their topic. And we'll reserve about 45 minutes at the end for a pretty robust question and answer and discussion session. The presenters that we picked today were really intentional, trying to cover the gambit from the national perspective to DOT efforts and best practices, and get some private sector insights, as well as one of the big challenges we have in the electrification field is all the partners and players, whether it be utilities, private sector, DOTs, departments of energy, and other collaborating groups that really need to work together to make that happen. So we'll engage in some discussion as well about collaboration. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a lot of time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to continue to add your questions and thoughts to the Q&A portion of the Zoom platform. So click on that and then add your questions in there. You can also add questions to the chat. We'll monitor both of those. And since we have more time for this session, hopefully we'll be able to answer those live and have more of an interactive dialogue than just responding in the chat. So first up, we have Lucy McKenzie from Atlas, and I'm going to go ahead and have her introduce herself and kick us off here. Go ahead, Lucy.
Great, thanks, Amanda, and good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucy McKenzie. I'm a director at Atlas Public Policy. We are a policy tech firm focused on using data to inform decision makers who are working in the public interest. And I'm going to kick us off today by presenting the results of an assessment that we recently completed back in April, which sought to figure out how much charging infrastructure we would need to support 100% electric passenger vehicles in the United States. This work was supported by the Hewlett Foundation, and hopefully it will provide us with some context for today's discussion by giving us an idea of the magnitude of the charging challenge that we face over the coming decades as we try to electrify vehicles. Today, I'm going to be presenting the very speedy 10 slides in 10 minutes version of this work. But the longer version with all the documentation slides and the additional data cuts that we did is available at atlaspolicy.com. So if we can actually go back one slide, I just wanted to just thank the numerous folks that provided data and advice throughout this work. In particular, I wanted to thank Eric Wood and Jan Boga at NREL and the team at the ICCT. Our work heavily leveraged theirs, and we're really grateful for all that work, so thank you. So next slide, the headline takeaway from our work was that we calculate a need of $87 billion in charging infrastructure investment over the next 10 years to get us on the path to full electrification of light-duty vehicles. $39 billion of that will be needed for home charging, shown here in blue, split between single family and multi-unit home charging. Another $39 billion shown in pink on the right is needed for public charging. And then $9 billion in green up top for light duty fleet vehicles that are charging at depots. Our analysis shows only a relatively small amount down the bottom there, though still a cool $300 million needed for charging at private workplaces over the next 10 years. And I've got a lot of questions in the past about why that private workplace charging is so small here. So I wanted to just speak to that a little bit. There's a few reasons for our relatively smaller workplace charging amount. The first is because we were looking out to 100% EV sales. So we modeled all of our EVs as full battery electric vehicles with a 250-mile range, which is the highest that we can go in NREL's EVI Pro Lite tool that we used. And we also only assume that only 50% of drivers will have access to home charging in the future. And when you do that, the NREL EVI Pro Lite tool that we relied on assumes that those who can charge at home will largely do so, but that we'll need this significant network of publicly available charging to support everyone else and to support those home charging drivers when they're on longer trips. So you get this very kind of public and home charging centric output. Also, public DC fast charging is far more expensive than workplace charging. And so when we put dollars to all these chargers, you get this much more significant investment need for public charging than you do for workplace charging. And finally, we model our public infrastructure as needing to be built 5 years ahead of EV adoption. We think that you need to have public charging out there and visible in order for people to make purchase decisions, whereas we only require the workplace charging to be built 2 years ahead of time. So what we see here is actually public charging need that's 3 years ahead of workplace charging. So having said all that, we know that workplace charging is really convenient for some drivers, and it can be a really good fit, especially for states with high solar production, since folks are parking their vehicles during the day when the sun is shining. So we hope and believe that folks will install more workplace charging than is shown here. But what we were trying to really get across is the minimum network of publicly accessible infrastructure that we're going to need to support all those drivers that don't have home charging. So 87 billion needed in total investment, 39 of that for public charging. And like all good charging analyses, ours started with this steep upward sloping EV adoption curve. For this exercise, we're not trying to predict what EV charging will be in any given year, but instead we were trying to ask what the charging needs would look like if we went from today's adoption levels to 100% EV sales in 2035. So you can see that marked here in 2035. That 100% sales goal is in line with the goals of leading states. New York, California, Massachusetts, and Washington are also focused in on those numbers. And also there are calls from 12 states to the Biden administration for a national sales mandate by 2035. We then use today's vehicle lifetimes to roll off those internal combustion vehicles that are on the road today and use the stock rollover model, sorry, that one's a mouthful, which gets us to 90% EVs on the road by 2050 and then 100% EVs on the road by 2060 once we squeeze out those last internal combustion engine vehicles off the road. Next slide. So then we use the vehicle to port ratios from NREL's EVI Pro Lite tool that I've mentioned to estimate the number of charging ports that we need to support that 100% EV future. And as I've mentioned, a key point of differentiation between our study and other studies is that we assumed only 50% of vehicles will eventually have home charging access. And that number is based off a forthcoming study from NREL that used a survey to estimate the share of vehicles that currently park near electricity or park in locations where owners think new electrical installation could occur. We chose that 50% number because we didn't want to assume that the high levels of home charging access that are true for current early adopters will continue out into the future. Instead, we were trying to ask what it would look like to start building the charging network that we'll need to support 100% EV future where all drivers have access to electric vehicles regardless of their home charging availability. Thinking about that 50% really revealed to us that we need to continue focusing on increasing access to home charging and figuring out how we're going to keep the cost of public charging down for folks that can't charge at home. For those 50% of vehicles that do park near electricity or think they'll be able to install electricity, we assume that those folks install a level 2 charger and charge overnight. And that means the vast majority of charging ports are still being built in homes, according to our analysis, almost 140 million home charging ports over the next 40 years. Next slide. We also model a significant need for a reliable network of public and workplace charging. So that's shown here. You've got in pink, the DC fast charging, those high-powered charging ports. In orange, level 2, the slower public charging ports, and in purple is the workplace charging that we modeled. We modeled in our base case 350 kilowatt DC fast charging, which is the fastest on the market at the moment. We decided on that level because we are in our model building fast charging 5 years ahead of EV adoption. And so we were looking to future-proof for the network that we think we'll need to support the kind of driver convenience that will really get us to 100% EV sales, even if power needs will be throttled in the very near term for today's vehicles. But there's good debate going on about what the right power level is for that fast charging and what makes most sense. So we also show in the notes here on the right, the results if you run the same analysis with 150 kilowatt fast charging, a lower power level on that fast charging. That gives you a higher number of ports needed and a higher total cost. Next slide. Just to drill down further, I wanted to show what that ramp up of public charging really looks like when it gets down to the state level and give you a sense for the challenge that we face. So here as an example is the Lower Atlantic region. We've got in our online deck the same slide for all of the states. But in the Lower Atlantic region here, you can see in 2020, the installations of DC fast charging ports of various power levels in these states. So those tend to be lower DC fast charging power levels than 350, a lot of them at 50 kilowatts, 120, 150. And then on the right of this green line, you see what we need. And these counts are 350 kilowatt fast charging ports. So those high powered fast chargers. You can see for all states, we see a really significant ramp needed, and that's true across the board when you look at the entire US also. Just here, I wanted to provide the last conclusion. Well, there are a number of them, but the last conclusion I'll talk about today, which was that there are cost savings that can come from installing multiple ports at one site at the outset. So on the right in green here, we show the $39 billion for public charging investment that we needed, that we calculated in our analysis. So that is the kind of base case work that we did in green there. And on the left, if you, with our base case analysis on the right, we use the charging cost if you install 6 to 10 ports per site. So a larger installation at each site. On the left in blue is the same number of ports if you install them at only 2 per site. So if you're installing them much more scattered all over the network. And you can see that you have a savings of almost $9 billion if you install those ports at a larger, at a smaller number of sites up front. And of course, there's limits to this. If you run into utility upgrade thresholds, that can increase costs significantly. But the general idea here is that if you have a significant and certain upfront funding source and a plan, then you can build out your public charging network at a lower total cost by installing it with more chargers at each site versus little by little, like has occurred in many states so far. And then finally, on this last slide, I wanted to just recognize that the costs that we included here are not exhaustive, and they likely don't include the full price tag of the charging ecosystem that we'll need. We relied on cost data from the ICCT, as I mentioned, which in turn used data from RMI and EPRI, so thanks to all those folks. And we include costs for hardware, installation, permits, and taxes, and typical utility upgrade costs for workplace charging, depot charging, public level 2, and up to 10 fast chargers per site. But we didn't include a number of things, including the utility upgrades if you do more than 10 of those really high-powered chargers per site, site selection, site agreements, site upgrades, maintenance, communication costs, battery and solar on site, a number of pieces here. So we think the real price tag will end up being higher than we modeled because of these reasons. Last piece here is that the next steps in our project are they're currently working on a similar assessment for medium and heavy duty trucks, and that will be coming out shortly. And we're working on a public version of this tool so folks can run their own analyses given their own cost assumptions and their own assumptions of chargers of ports for vehicle and power level. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. Some really great information. I think, as Lucy mentioned, it's really helping us to understand what it would take, not necessarily what the future looks like, right? There's no clear crystal ball here, but I think it helps us all as DOTs to understand kind of what our role is, especially as we think about public charging and those needs there. And I'll just share from Oregon DOT's perspective, the numbers Lucy shared really track well with some of our own internal research that we see by 2025, we need a 5-fold increase in charging. So you need a boatload of charging and a boatload of money to get this to be successful. So I think especially one of those last slides that you showed, that's how can we do this cost efficiently? Some of those great lessons learned are, I think, really helpful for us as we struggle with what the right path is for doing this. So thank you, Lucy, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great, so we'll transition now to hear some information from Texas and some electrification scenarios they've looked at. So for that, I'll turn to Reza with TTA.
All right, thanks for the intro. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity for presenting an update on the research project that we are doing for TxDOT and the MPOs here in Texas. So I want to kind of, before I start, just acknowledge this is part of an ongoing research project that is focusing on the ozone impact of electrification in Texas. And we have a diverse steering committee that is led by Tim, and we are fortunate to have everyone here. It's just kind of great project. So next one, please. So I think that I can start here by an overview of what we have here in Texas, and this shows the registration number. These are all the electric vehicles, including battery electric and PHEVs at the county level. And the numbers are basically from January 2021. Okay. And, you know, it highlights two things. I think that we still, it is, you know, that it's obvious that most of the electric vehicles that we have are concentrated in our urban areas. The areas that you see basically correspond to Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio. And also the trend that you see on the left-hand side, you know, it's just kind of, it seems that since the introduction of Model 3, that the battery electric really took off, and PHEVs are still growing, but at a much lower pace. Well, I mean, it's steadily growing, but the battery electric seems to be that it's just kind of going its own way and going up. And this is kind of the same information that for each of those regions, the three major regions that have the most of these vehicles. And it's the same trend over there overall. As you see, there are some, you know, that last year was an odd year, so that 2021 number that you see is not representative. We are in the process of updating that, but overall trend is the same. As you see, that it's just battery electric is dominating, and we expect to go there. We've done prior work on this area, 2012 to 2014. At that time, with the focus on the air quality conformity, the transportation conformity. Basically, the question was how to incorporate them into that process from emissions perspective. And we looked at we did a lot of data collection from HEVs, PHEVs, and also ICE vehicles. We had prior data. And basically, one of the items that we were looking at, are they driven differently? So we built moves-based drive cycles for them, and we did emissions data collection and kind of looked at the technology that was available then, which is different, quite different now. And that was the predecessor to this work that I'm presenting to them. Next one, please. So the work that is for this project is stemmed from the kind of expansion of the previous work, and is that what is the previous work was emissions. We are kind of getting to the air quality side of it. So what is the total impact here? So far, we've looked at the emissions and usually only the mobile source, basically on-road portion of it. But the question was, what is the total impact? And when we say total impact, just kind of two major blocks are the direct emissions from vehicles, basically the mobile source, and the indirect that comes from the electricity. And there are some differences here, really. On the direct side, you basically emit those pollutants when you use the vehicle, for the most part, except for evaporative. They are also, I mean, there are the running emissions as well. But on the indirect one and the emissions from the electricity generation, it is happening at the time of charging. So it's a time difference. You're not emitting when you're using the vehicle. So that is really important in the context of air quality and not just the emissions part. So there is a distinction over there. And then connecting these two sides together, hit next, please, is the charging behavior. So this is how that's basically how they are connected together. When and how much of electricity is being used, because electricity is basically generated almost at the same time, the current technology, I should say, at the same time that is being used. So, I mean, I'm not mentioning not considering the battery storage and it's not because it's not a significant amount of the demand right now. But overall, so it's that timing is really important. So when it comes to looking at of analyzing what is the air quality impacts of the overall impact of these electric vehicles, really, I mean, there are a few things that need to be considered. Two major things are scope of the impact and the chemistry. When it comes to the scope of impact, there are basically, when it comes to emissions and the pollutants, we have three levels. We have local, regional, and global. And I have highlighted here the global and regional. When in terms of the CO2 and greenhouse gases, it really doesn't matter where you emit. As long as it's in the air, it's going to impact everyone. Whereas in the context of regional ozone, ground level ozone, and its predecessor NOx, it's a local, not the local, regional impact. And it doesn't matter, well, it doesn't count if it's not in that area of interest. So if you're pulling energy from somewhere far and it's not affecting your ozone formation in your area, essentially it doesn't exist in the context of the analysis. And then adding to that complexity is the chemistry of it, especially for ozone. So ozone is not emitted by vehicles, whereas it's formed actually at the kind of interaction between NOx and VOC in presence of heat and sunlight. So timing of it matters as well. So bringing all of this together, it's really important in the context of building the scenarios. Next one, please. Hit next. Okay, so when we started looking at the scenario building exercise, we identified three major items. We call them building blocks. One is the vehicle activity, how they're driven, where are they driven, and time and space basically, and how much of activity we see. Next one, please. And that relates basically the first item relates to the emissions, the en route portion of the emissions, and then on the other hand is the emissions from electricity generation. Again, where it's generated. Go back, please. Where it's generated and what fuel or energy source was, or emission rates corresponding to that, and then connecting this to, as I mentioned before, it's the charging profile. When and where it's charged and how much electricity was needed during that time. Next one, please. So I'll go quickly over these three items and how we have captured them in our work in terms of kind of capturing that impact for future years. So when it comes to the vehicle activity, this actually is missing the title for some reason, but these are the items that fit under the vehicle activity. It's basically we are looking at the utilization that how far they are driven and how many starts. Basically, those are the major types of activities, and then their distribution. As I mentioned before, time and space is really important in terms of the air quality, and also vehicle fleet. What do they replace? Well, when we talk in terms of the EVs, are they replacing the vehicle at all, or are they new? How many of them are there, or we expect to be out there? Next one, please. Oh, that, okay, next, please. Okay, so this kind of shows some of the data sources that can be used in that context, answering those questions. Annual energy outlook that is updated annually is a great resource. Many consider it very conservative when it comes to EVs, but it's a great resource. You know, it's just a lot of input goes into it and very robust. And then also the other questions that I mentioned, you know, whether they are replacing a new vehicle or not. Okay, I'll go quick. And then, you know, the rest of it in terms of the age of the vehicle they're replacing, and so on and so forth. Next one, please. We use some telematics data to answer some of those in terms of the spatial and temporal distributions. So what I want to highlight is that with the new data becoming available, we can do a lot more and a more detailed understanding of these behaviors. We looked, basically we broke it down by the type of vehicle, and this shows it the spatial and temporal distribution for Houston. Next one, please. Okay, and on the power generation, the system consists of multiple components, and understanding of that the components is really important in the context of there are losses during this whole basically flow, and we need to capture those in terms of understanding and capturing the true impact. Next one. Okay, and this one kind of touches upon our focus of our study, which I mentioned, is ozone and local. So it's really important. We're kind of considering that since this is ozone and kind of regional impact, we only need to capture those that happen in that area, and the data that we have used is the EPA's air markets data that provides basically that information, and we can basically identify the local or the regional impact. Next one. And also in terms of the future year projections for the electricity generation, the annual energy outlook is a great resource over there as well. Next one. And the previous presenter mentioned this EVI Pro developed by NREL is a great resource in terms of the charging profile. Charging profile, I put these two over there just to highlight them, that there are overall we can consider two major types of charging that are really important in this context. The unmanaged on the right hand, so basically drivers charge whenever that they can, and it's kind of more or less corresponds to the current condition. Whereas we have the other one is more of idealistic. If through incentives or smart charging, you can shift, somehow you can shift most of the charging to overnight when there is less demand in terms on the electricity generation. And that has very big impact on terms of the emissions and air quality potential. Next one, please. And combining that, this is kind of a very high level of what we are considering for our study, and we are using modeling in that context, and an ongoing project right now. Next one. That will take care of my presentation. And I didn't have 93 slides.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. So interesting to definitely hear from the technical side, looking at the emissions and potential from electrification. So I think a lot of folks our committee deal both on the technical side and kind of the policy side. So some great insights there. Thank you so much. There is a question in the Q&A I would just direct your attention to. Maybe you can respond to that as we move on to Tonya Buell, my friend to the north. So Tonya from Washington DOT is going to talk with us a little bit about some pretty interesting work that WashDOT has done at rest areas, but also kind of share some general insights on the fun things that we conspire on between our West Coast states and electrification in general. So Tonya, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's been really interesting so far, and we are actually working on something similar in Washington State, a mapping and forecasting tool for electric vehicle and hydrogen fuel cell refueling, mapping and forecasting. And hopefully I'll be able to come back and present on that someday. But today I'm focused on safety rest areas. And Amanda asked me to talk about this because we got a little creative with our focus on putting in charging along our highway corridors. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that. But before we get there, Amanda asked me to introduce myself, so I'm going to do that. Tonya Buell. I'm with the Washington State Department of Transportation in the Innovative Partnerships Office. And I have been working in clean fuels and clean transportation for more than 2 decades. And I started in California, Davis, California, where I was born and raised, and worked for Sacramento Regional Transit for about 5 years, working on bus and light rail activities. And actually was in charge of the largest and fastest CNG fueling facility, grand opening many years ago. And I've been interested in clean fuels since then. And right now I am, as I said, with WashDOT, and I've been working on electric vehicle charging for since about 2009. And so this talk today is just about a little tiny piece of the work that we've been doing over many years, but it's been helpful to others trying to figure out how to move forward with rest area charging. So if you're from the East Coast, you probably don't even have to worry about it. You can find everything you need on your turnpikes at your stops there. But if you're on the West Coast and have safety rest areas that might have been built after the 1960s, then you don't get all the exemptions and grandfathering in that the East Coast gets. So we've been really challenged, at least in Washington, Oregon, and California, on how we can provide electric vehicle charging services at our safety rest areas. And in Washington, we have 47 of them. You can see on this map here, and the larger the green circle, the more activity at that rest area. So 27 of them are on highway corridors, and then 20 of them are on state routes. And so the ones that are on the highway corridors are most used. That's where the truck drivers line up to get their required rest. And then some of the ones on the state routes are really just because and oftentimes there isn't really anything else around there. So people need to stop and use the restrooms or stretch their legs or walk their dogs or whatever. So there's different types of rest areas. And if you look at the I-5 corridor, which is the major north-south corridor with lots of green on it, that's Interstate 5. And when we originally envisioned the West Coast Electric Highway in Washington State, at least, we really were thinking, oh, we could have electric vehicle charging at all our safety rest areas. They're 30 to 50 miles apart, and that would be perfect. So I think I'm one of, well, I know I'm one of the only co-creators of the West Coast Electric Highway still working for the state DOT. And so I remember going through all these different alternatives, and we ended up putting our charging at retail locations, private retail locations along the highway corridor, such as shopping malls and retail stores and so on. So the rest areas didn't work out, but we still wanted to put in a couple. And so the next slide will show some of the speed bumps and roadblocks. One is in Washington State, we have some state law. We have one state law that says you should put charging at all of your safety rest areas if you've got funding. And then we have a prohibition of gifting of public funds, which makes it really difficult to offer anything like that for free. And then we were able to get our state legislators to allow an alternative fuel corridor project. So we could put in some charging at rest areas. Next slide, please. And then there's the federal prohibition. I'm sure folks have heard about that there is no commercial activity allowed at safety rest areas. There are some vending machines that, and I don't even know if they have telephones anymore, but basically it's restrooms and an area to walk around or sit and have a picnic, but you don't see a lot on the West Coast at safety rest areas. And then there's also this prohibition against having anything to do with serving motor vehicles along the right of way. So it's been a big struggle. We actually submitted a request for an exemption, a SEP 15 document that California, Oregon, and Washington all signed on to, requesting an exemption so we could put in some electric vehicle charging, but and that was in 2009. That didn't work out. And I know there's efforts now underway to try to get some exemptions on this in the new investment package at the federal level, but it's been an ongoing issue. So, well, okay, you can go on to the next slide, that's fine. So we do have a couple safety rest areas where we really wanted to have some charging. We got some Recovery Act funding, ARA funding, back in 2010 from our state energy program, similar to Oregon State. And we have two of our gateway rest areas. One as you're coming down from Canada into Washington State, and the other as you're driving north from Oregon into Washington State. And so we really wanted to have charging there and highlight the West Coast Electric Highway, at least provide information about the highway corridor charging available. So, and a lot of people stop there. And so we wanted to be able to, you got a sneak peek of our solution, but anyway, reaching more than 1 million visitors that come. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see our solution was we couldn't provide charging equipment and charge a fee. And then we couldn't give away, because of the gift of public funds issue, we ended up finding a nonprofit organization that could pay for the electricity. So it was a very creative partnerships situation. And it was actually, I was presenting at the Seattle Electric Vehicle Association and heard about Adopt a Charger and contacted Kitty Adams, the woman on the left, and she, although most of her projects at the time were in the Bay Area in California, she agreed to go out of state and help us in Washington State with getting more charging. Their goal is to get as much charging out there for the public as possible. And so we had a great partnership for that. Next slide, please. And so there were a lot of really positive benefits of putting in charging at the rest areas. One is it really helped our staff understand all the steps involved in installing charging. Instead of just hiring a company to come in and put charging, we actually oversaw every step and all the permitting and exemption forms we had to fill out. And we actually had a lot more coordination with the Federal Highway Administration with, for example, Diane Turchetta, working on the alternative fuel corridor program with Dan Mathis, the former regional director here for Federal Highways, who just retired. And so I think it was a really great way to learn more and get staff expertise increased on electric vehicle charging. And it helped local companies with actually having work. So we opened our electric vehicle stations, which are really just 2 level 2 pedestals at each of these 2 rest areas. And we had a big celebration with Adopt a Charger and the Seattle Electric Vehicle Association. This was the first of 3 events that we had that day to open up the West Coast Electric Highway. This was the only safety rest area one. The others were at big events at big shopping centers. But it was really special because the EV drivers and those really passionate about electric vehicles and wanting electric vehicle charging everywhere, they were involved in this, and we had developed some great kiosks with information about where people could find fast charging all along the corridor from British Columbia and at the time all the way to the California border through Oregon. And it's been just a really great partnership with the Oregon DOT. And as you can see, we promoted that the electricity was available and provided by Adopt a Charger and the Seattle Electric Vehicle Association, and we put that on our informational displays. Next slide. Oh, I guess that's it. So, I think that this was nearly 10 years ago. It was a creative solution at the time. Probably one of my favorite achievements on this project, but I don't think it's really the long-term solution. Really, I think the laws need to be changed, especially for our safety rest areas that are in rural locations where there's nothing else around, and just to provide that safety net of chargers for people traveling in these areas. So especially off of some of the state routes. So we were able to demonstrate this and allow the traveling public to see the charging, to read the displays. And it's been an interesting project, and hopefully all of our safety rest areas will at least have level 2 charging equipment in the future to be able to be there in case people need it as a safety net. Thank you so much for having me today.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate it. So as Tanya mentioned, this is not like a brand new thing that that just came about. It's been in place for a little while, but thought it relevant to this group because this issue of people having a lot more interest in charging station at rest areas. We have a lot of states and legislatures really pressuring the DOTs to do this, yet we have some pretty restrictive laws in our ability to do it. So just offers folks a sense of kind of a creative workaround to that in the short term. And I would echo Tonia's thoughts of the short term. And I think there's a number of DOTs and other entities that are really looking for some longer term exceptions. So thanks, Tonia. Now we'll transition to Andrew Dick to talk to us a little bit about Electrify America and some of the works and investments that you're making. So Andrew.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Thanks, folks, for joining, and thanks for having me today, and to all the other presenters who've gone so far. It's a ton of great information that we've heard so far. My name is Andrew Dick. I'm State Government Affairs Manager for Electrify America. Previous to that, I worked for Oregon Department of Transportation, so I worked closely with Tonya and Amanda. And before that, I worked for NESCOM. So I've been working on EV policy for about 12 years now. Today I wanted to cover a couple different topics. The question was, what direction is the industry headed? Certainly we have plans that we've announced recently, and I want to give an overview of those, but certainly there are other opportunities on the table, particularly for state DOTs, that could be completely transformative to this industry over the coming years. To the ability of folks to drive electric. So I wanted to cover both of those briefly today. So first off, what is Electrify America? So Electrify America is now the largest open ultra-fast charging network in the United States. And we say open because Tesla's out there, they're a very large network, but at least at this point in time, they are proprietary. You need a Tesla, you need to be in the club in order to use their stations. And there's nothing that anybody else can do. There's no adapter, things like that. It's all authenticated through the vehicle. So we want to be the charging network for everybody, and we support the open charging standards that are compatible with all of the vehicles, including Tesla, via an adapter. And so we are the largest DC fast charging provider for the open standards. We've come a long way since we installed our first station back in May of 2018 in Chicopee, Massachusetts. Now we have over 660 stations, over 2,800 individual chargers. And you can see from the map that from the very beginning of our investments, we focused on building a national corridor charging network. We did certainly want to build in sort of the nodes where we expect the EV market to develop in the near term. But connecting those nodes via a national network was really important to us. And credit where credit is due. Tesla did a great job with that. That was one of the first things that they did as well. They deployed a long-range vehicle and they deployed a national corridor charging network. And so whereas with the non-Tesla vehicles, for a long time, you'd seen people adopt those as a second car, commuter car, around town car. Folks in the Tesla were taking national cross-country trips and posting about it on social media. And so a very fast national charging network is really what's necessary for folks to be comfortable adopting an electric vehicle as their primary vehicle, rather than just something that they use for short trips. And that's been a key part of our philosophy since the beginning. So the first major announcement that we've had recently is our Cycle 3 National ZEV investment plan. So we are funded with $2 billion from the Volkswagen settlement, and we have 4 investment cycles. Each one of those is $500 million. At the end of this year, that's the conclusion of Cycle 2. So at the beginning of next year, that's the beginning of Cycle 3. And every time we do one of these 2.5-year long cycles, we publish in advance a plan for where we're going to invest and what we're going to be doing in the next cycle. So as we've done in previous cycles, our Cycle 3 plan contains a combination of metro charging investments and corridor charging investments. So we are returning to cities like Denver, Seattle, Portland, Washington, DC, Boston, New York City, Houston, the number of cities around the country. But then in terms of corridor investments, there are a few things that I really wanted to highlight here. So if you look at the map of where we are today, you can see there's a pretty significant gap in the upper Midwest. And it's something that we have wanted to close for a long time. And it always comes down to sort of competing priorities in terms of how we serve the most drivers in each one of our investment cycles. And so we're very pleased to say that we're going to be closing those gaps. We're going all through Wyoming on 25 and 80. We're going through Montana, across the Dakotas, Minnesota, 90 and 94. And then in the Southeast, we actually had another pretty significant gap between Dallas and Birmingham. Actually going into Atlanta there, but part of it to Birmingham is already done. So we're going to be closing that as well. And there are a number of other sort of investment areas around the country you can see on the map, but that's sort of the core of what we're focused on in the next cycle. So in addition to the Cycle 3 announcement, really, we made an announcement called Boost. And really what Boost is it's the first time that our company has announced a plan to invest significantly above and beyond the initial $2 billion investment that comes from the Volkswagen settlement. So we are going to have about 800 stations with 3,500 chargers by the end of this year. And we have announced plans to more than double that number by the end of 2025. And some of those investments are going to come from the Cycle 3 plan, but many of them are going to be in addition to the Cycle 3 plan. A little bit of Cycle 4 is covered, but really the message here is that there's going to be a significant additional investment beyond the $2 billion to really increase our coverage, build a cross-country corridor up in Canada, as well as filling out a number of the remaining corridors in the United States. And so we've published what we call on the bottom right here, a notional map. You can't zoom way in on this and figure out where we're going to build because we haven't actually finalized the sites yet. But this is indicative of the level of coverage that we really want to see at the end of that investment period. When we're building these sites, we're building 150 kilowatt minimum in metro areas and 350 kilowatt minimum on the highways. The reason for this is that the customer experience, again, for getting somebody into an electric vehicle as their primary vehicle, something that they use even for the long trips, even to go to grandma's house once a year, even to drive their kid back to school, you really need a customer experience that approaches gasoline in terms of convenience and refueling speeds. 5 years ago, the state of the art for the open charging standards was 50 kilowatts of charging power. And what that means for customer experience is that you restore about 3 miles of range for every minute that you're plugged in. So you can imagine driving 90 miles, stopping for half an hour, driving another 90 miles, stopping for half an hour. You're not going to make very good time on a longer trip. It might be okay for something you don't do very often, but it's not the type of thing that is going to allow somebody to use an electric vehicle as their primary vehicle. So 350 kilowatt charging, you can restore 20 miles of range per minute that you're plugged in a compatible vehicle. So now you drive 200 miles and you stop for 10 minutes. You grab a sandwich, you grab a coffee, you drive another 200 miles. And we believe that that is transformative. And Lucy from Atlas Public Policy spoke to this earlier. You know, this approach of going with ultra fast charging, 150 and 350 kilowatt charging, is not just borne out in terms of the consumer research, that this is what consumers demand in order to adopt an electric vehicle as their primary vehicle. But really the incredible thing from the Atlas study is the conclusion that this is actually also the most cost-effective way to build this out. The throughput of these stations is so much higher that you have a little bit of a cost increase by going to the higher power equipment, but you can serve so many more vehicles. That the actual cost of electrifying the transportation system using modern, ultra-fast, 350 kilowatt equipment is lower than the alternative of going with a less expensive 150 kilowatt unit. And so that was a fascinating result to us. You know, it really, you know, bears out a lot of the strategy that we've had so far. But that's the direction that the research is really pointing to, is that 150 kilowatts minimum and really 350 kilowatts as a best practice is what we need, particularly for highway corridor charging moving forward. Nevertheless, so when we started building this out, I said back in 2016, the average charging speed of vehicles was 50 kilowatts. And so people said, you guys are crazy. Why are you building stations that are 7 times faster than any of the vehicles on the road can accept? And there's a simple answer, which is that we were talking to the automakers, we were talking to the researchers, and we knew what the customers were demanding, and we knew what products were coming to market. And so we were not building stations in 2018 to serve vehicles from 2016, 2017, 2018. We were building stations intended to serve the vehicles that have yet to come to market and that are just starting to come to market this year, future-proofing the network so that this is a valuable investment. And you know, we're not building something for a dinosaur technology that in a few years from now, there's going to be an ultra-fast meteor and all of this is going to be obsolete. So here's a chart just kind of showing the trend that's happened with the vehicles. And I said we took an if you build it, they will come mentality, and you can see that here. The vehicles these days are longer range and faster charging power. And so this is kind of a hard chart to read because there's 2 axes here, but I'm looking at the right axis of charging power. You can see back in 2016, average charging power was just north of 50 kilowatts. And just over the past 5 years, 150 kilowatts is now the average charging speed for new vehicles that are coming to market. And the rate of that change is accelerating. And some of the products that are coming out, it's not just premium products. Hyundai is putting out vehicles with 225 kilowatts of charging speed. And then in the more premium segment, you get vehicles like the Lucid Air, which is the first vehicle that can actually use the entire 350 kilowatts. But these are the technologies that enable that customer experience of speed, reliability, and a comparable customer experience to gasoline that really is necessary to support the growth of this sector. This is what our stations look like. Another finding of the Atlas study was that it's more cost effective to do this with larger stations, and we think that's also really important for customer experience. We do not want somebody to arrive at the station and find that we only built 2 chargers and there are 2 vehicles that are currently charging, so now they have to wait or they have to find a new charging station. So we build large format chargers, between 4 and 10 dispensers per site, so we can serve a large number of vehicles and decrease the possibility of queuing, that somebody has to wait for a charge. Just one other thing here, so we do install an ADA compliant charger at every single site that we build. That's a space that is designed to be ADA accessible with standards. It has an access aisle so that you can park a vehicle there and still navigate a mobility device by that. And certainly all the touchscreen controls and the handles and things like that are within the vertical range that's required by ADA. And this is a best practice. Just again, we want to be the charging network for everybody, and so that features through many parts of our design. So I just have a couple more slides here, but I wanted to shift gears in the planning session. Amanda brought up, what should state DOTs be thinking about? And really the elephant in the room here is the $6.25 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure framework that would be dedicated to highway corridor charging and which would be administered by state DOTs. And obviously, there's a couple of major bills in Congress right now, and anything could fall apart at any point in time. But this is not part of the reconciliation bill that seems to be in a bit of trouble. This is part of the bipartisan infrastructure framework that has already passed the Senate and is up for a vote in the House as early as next week. And the president has said that he will sign this legislation if it passes. This would very rapidly give state DOTs the biggest role that any organizations have had in history in building out charging infrastructure in the United States. It's a huge amount of money, and state DOTs would be responsible for administering it. Most of that is coming through a formula funding program. Your state will get an allocation based on your population and miles of interstate and however else that works. And then the funds must be dedicated to charging along designated alt fuels corridors until those corridors are complete. So the corridors that you designated or the corridors that you may designate in the future as this moves forward, you must invest these funds along highway corridor charging on those corridors until that's built out. And then once you demonstrate to the secretary that it's built out, then you can start looking at other locations. States need to develop and submit a plan to USDOT outlining their investment objectives, how they're going to use these funds. And then also there's contemplation in the bill that states are going to use public-private partnerships or directly work with the private sector in order to accomplish this. And so in terms of what states should be really thinking of, all the research that we have going back to 1997 says that you need chargers to be fast and reliable. This comes up again and again. Folks are concerned about technology failure. It is the primary reason in a JD Power survey that we looked at for customers being hesitant to adopt electric vehicle technology. And then concern over availability of charging and the length of time it takes to charge are the other major concerns. So the charging that you deploy, it has to be fast and innovative. You need to be going with the ultra fast charging speeds. Building out 50 kilowatts, again, the average charging speed of vehicles this year is 150 kilowatts. So that is not a forward-thinking technology that will help you to future-proof your network. Convenient payment options is another one. A number of states have already passed requirements that you have a credit card reader, so you don't necessarily have to own a smartphone or download the app or have the membership. But then also reliability is really important, and customer centricity, making sure that these stations are at locations that customers where they feel safe, where there are amenities, where there are restrooms, where there's somewhere they can grab a sandwich, get some coffee, where they can be comfortable stopping for 10 to 15 minutes while they're charging along their trip. And those are really the principles that I would emphasize for states that are getting into this space and trying to figure out what they need. You need to go with the fast charging equipment to be able to future-proof this network, and reliability and the ease of use for the customer are the other major considerations. So that's all I had. Contact information is here if you want to contact me directly, and thanks so much for your time.
Great, thank you, Andrew. A lot of great information there, and thanks for flipping through those pretty fast, but I think a lot of great stuff for folks to chew on. And maybe, Andrew, just I'll flag for you that I like that you talked about the fast charging. I do think that is future proofing. At the same time, a lot of our states out there have some very rural areas, and how do we get those power needs out to those locations and some of those things. So I might hit you up on that when we get to the Q&A section. As Phil noted in the chat box, please just start adding some questions to the Q&A portion. We can ask those as we get into the discussion. We have one more great presenter online though, and that is Candy, and I'll have her introduce herself. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Candy Worley, and I am part of the Innovation Department at Nevada Department of Transportation. I'm happy to be presenting today. Next slide, please. I first wanted to share with you what Rev West is. Governor Sandoval, who was the governor of Nevada back in 2016, had met with Utah and Colorado to encourage an effort of having electric travel through our 3 states that would be easy and accessible. Utah and Colorado joined forces and they started building the I-80 corridor. From there, we had 8 other governors that got involved and signed a memorandum of understanding that would provide framework in creating the Intermountain West EV corridor. This agreement then brought us together and we formed the Rev West. NASIO, who is the National Association of State Energy Officials, had taken over the responsibility to facilitate and coordinate the communication from the 11 states. In 2019, the DOTs were asked to provide some efforts towards what the energy offices were doing. And at that time, we found out that it was important for both offices to be working together so that our strategies could actually become in place. Next slide, please. Today, the Rev West is creating best practices and procedures to enhance electric vehicle adoption. We are coordinating EV charging station locations and creating voluntary minimum standards throughout the 11 states. We are also leveraging economies to build scale for the electric vehicles. We're working currently with national parks in our region for electric vehicle charging, electric buses, and electric shuttles to reduce the greenhouse gas waste and to maintain the park's natural beauty. Education of both personal car owners and fleet owners is very important to us, and that is where we are putting our efforts as of now. We raise awareness of electric vehicles and reduce the concerns of the consumer. We're trying to allow the consumer to realize that there is no longer range anxiety and the increase of and helping increase the electric vehicle adoption. We're collaborating on infrastructure needs within our own states and crossing state lines. Next slide. The Governor's Office of Energy, in participation with NV Energy and Valley Electric Association, expanded our state's electric vehicle charging infrastructure by placing charging stations at strategic locations between Reno and Las Vegas on US 95. That was our first designated electric highway in the state of Nevada. Then we received the VW settlement funds, which that money fell into the lap of the Governor's Office of Energy. We have spent approximately 25 million. We accepted 25 million in the VW settlement funds, and we have chosen to dedicate 15% of those funds on approximately 3.7 million towards the build out of the Nevada Electric Highway. NDOT and the GOE have worked collaboratively in partnering with energy providers throughout the state, looking at developing charging stations along the major corridors to achieve the ambitious goal of completing the 5 most traveled roads in the state to federal requirements of every 50 miles. Next slide, please. This map indicates our 5 corridors. We have 2 traveling north and south and 3 traveling east and west. Nevada is known as a pass-through state, so many of the ports in California where a lot of product comes in travels through our state. So we are trying to not only help the consumer, the general consumer come through, but we're also looking at mid-weight and heavyweight vehicles as well, and how we can help them with their EV efforts. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see that is actually a shipping container with solar panels on it. And we were able to put that in an area where in our state where we actually don't even have electricity yet. So that was an exciting project for us. The I-15, which travels at the bottom of our state from east to west, was the first complete electric corridor in the state and in the Intermountain region. So from state border to state border, it was completed in 2018. The I-80 is currently our top priority. However, there are pockets of desert that do not have utility. And while we are we're piloting the solar project, we are also looking to help the electric companies out in those areas to provide energy where there's no energy. So when we go in and do road maintenance, we allow the energy companies to come in and put in their infrastructure so that it's already there and ready to expand. Next slide. Currently, we have 18 electric utility providers that we are working with. NV Energy serves approximately 2/3 of the state, and there are 12 other companies that balance the rural districts. We have learned successful practices working with NV Energy, and that success has been able to be provided to other services as well. NV Energy has definitely held our hand and other electric companies' hands to work together. They have really worked hard at not just servicing their own area, but making sure that our state as a whole is able to work together. We've learned successful practices by collaborating with NV Energy and our 12 rural districts. We've relocated utilities prior to and during construction. We have a blended approach. Fast permitting is available to the right-of-way for these electric companies, and that has helped the growth. We accommodate the utility not only with right-of-way, but with the safety measures, because as we are doing projects, we have all that safety equipment in place. So they're able to go in and not have to spend the extra money being a smaller company and putting all that in place. It's a cooperative effort, and our maintenance crews are able to educate the electric company's maintenance crews with cross-training, how to use different tools, and we're both able to learn from each other's innovative tools. Next slide, please. We also have collaborative efforts with our MPOs and our RTCs with the same efforts as the electric companies. As we go in and make changes, major changes to highways, we're allowing the MPOs and the RTCs to come in and also put down conduit or any updated wiring that they would want. We've been able to expand our DSRC communications throughout our state in areas where originally there was no communication. We've also been able to increase the 5G infrastructure under our roads. As we open up the roads, they come in and they put in the required equipment that they need. Even though they might not be using it at that time, it is going to be there for the future. They'll know where their equipment is. We've worked together to allow for faster, efficient placement of charging stations. Next slide, and that's all I have. I was quick today.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really great information there. I really like also the discussions about partnerships with utilities. I think that's something often as state DOTs, something that we can foster is the collaboration between very different utility entities, and there can be a lot in a different state, as Katie's indicating there. And I think the best practices around the fast permitting, the safety aspects, the training, I think those are really exciting ways to partner with utilities. So thank you so much, Candy. So with that, let's go ahead and shift into the discussion period. So I would ask that all panelists go ahead and pop back on your camera. We can see your smiling face here. And we'll go ahead and ask some questions as they come in. We did have one, Lucy, I'm probably going to hit you up first, that came in the chat to us panelists. And the question was, how much of the public charging will need to be adjacent to homes, like street side residential or multifamily, versus at non-home destinations where people may stop during their travels?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We didn't assess that split, so I don't have a nice, easy answer for that one. I'll just say that there's significant need for both. As Andrew mentioned, the corridors for longer travels are very important. I will say that in the work that we relied on from NREL, they did not include charging demand for trips over 250 miles. So even though we would expect that a number of the chargers that we forecast as being needed would be built along those travel corridors, we are underestimating currently the total need for DC fast charging because we don't have those really long trips in there. They've been working at NREL with the California Energy Commission on an update called EVI Road Trip, and we'd like to be able to incorporate that in future versions, but we are underestimating slightly that fast charging need at the moment.
Great, thank you, Lucy. So Andrew, I'm going to hit you up next. I can give you a little bit of warning on this, but the question around, I think you're right in terms of future proofing, how do we look for those higher power charging stations at the same time as we have rural areas, and I think might go to some of the question in the chat about the electricity demand. Do we have the capabilities to get those higher power charging out to some of those locations? So thoughts on that?
Sure. So, as Candy was saying from Nevada, working with the utilities from the outset is extremely important. And some states have already developed, mapping tools that show where you have three-phase power and things like that can be very helpful. So figuring out where you have the power and then being able to build sites that align with that, that is the first thing that you should be doing. So you don't spend a lot of time developing a site and then only when you're ready to go start construction, realize that you're going to have to run a utility interconnection for 6 miles or something like that in order to get the power that you need. So that upfront planning is crucial. And then beyond that, there's a lot that you can do with battery storage. We use battery storage at our sites. There's a company called FreeWire that has a product that explicitly is designed to be able to provide fast charging at locations that don't have access to significant power by using battery storage. So there are definitely technical fixes, but planning and working with the utility from step one will allow you to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of a cost-effective site, as high power as possible, and spending as little as possible in terms of the technical adjustments you need to make to accommodate that.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Candy, is there anything else you want to add onto that from your experience with Nevada and partnerships with utilities?
Sure. Our biggest partnership has been with NV Energy. They've been very helpful. They're very pro electric vehicle, which is, it's fabulous because they do a lot of the advertising and pushing to the consumer for the electric vehicles. We at NDOT have not been relied on upon that. We've also ran into some conflicting leadership where some of the leadership believes, well, we didn't build gas stations, so why are we building electric charging stations? However, we are finding that those charging stations are on our right of way and we are taking ownership, just like Washington did, which is Washington's a great role model. So we've kind of had to shift our thinking, and NV Energy has just really stepped in and taken the lead and held our hand to get to that next stage. So while we're working together and then building out our highway, finding that there's areas where it's no longer Nevada Energy's territory, they've been very helpful in reaching out to that territory's electric company and using the right verbiage to communicate with them to let them know that it's okay and that they can work with us. So it's really been helpful. If you can find your one provider that is willing to step up and actually help you through the process, it's very helpful.
That's great feedback. And maybe along the same lines, there are a number of players as we think about transportation that need to contribute and work together in partnership. So I'm wondering, maybe Tonya, if I can pick on you, talk a little bit about some of the partnerships and opportunities you've seen at WashDOT standpoint, kind of pivoting from that utility side we were just talking about, and opportunities around, I know in Oregon, we're talking about make-ready sites and some of those kind of things, and basically pre-plumbing locations where we can, and how do we phase some of these things out. So love to hear thoughts on maybe partnerships from WashDOT's perspective and not only today, but in the future as well.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And it's really been a pleasure working with your team at Oregon DOT with Mary Brazel and others. And I'm very excited to see that Oregon is now upgrading those legacy 50 kilowatt CHAdeMO chargers. And so you're leading the way on that because we still have some of those old legacy chargers, 12 of them in Washington that we're working to get upgraded. And so a lot of the work that we do is in our Innovative Partnerships Office is partnering with public and private sector. I 100% agree that the number one partner for this is the electric utility. And through West Coast Electric Highway, we have worked with dozens of them. And because we are along highway corridors in all different areas, and there are more than 60 electric utilities in our state, a few big investor-owned utilities, and then several municipal and local utilities. And we've really taken a partnership approach since the original installations of the West Coast Electric Highway that opened in 2012. We've been working to expand charging along our highway corridors. We've actually done that through, instead of just putting out a request for proposals for having a private company come in and just put charging in at all their locations, we have taken more of a partnership approach where we're providing grants to nonprofit organizations and government agencies who are required to partner with a private sector partner to put in charging in communities along a corridor. And it's a competitive grant program with high scoring for local match and for partnering with it could be your utility. In fact, some of our grantees actually have several utilities that provide special rates during the 5-year period of performance. And then also working with other partners, whether it's the car manufacturers, car dealerships, the local city and county, because there's a lot of people that need to be involved in electric vehicle charging for it to be successful. It can't just be the DOT paving the road and putting up these chargers. It's for our successful programs, it's been working with the communities, getting the community support, and these communities really want to see charging and will help find locations, help find where the power resources are. And so we have hundreds of partners actually, and even within our state agencies, our sister agencies at Department of Commerce Energy Office and Ecology and others, we all really partner to make sure we're taking the limited funds that we have, soon to be a lot of funds, but being able to synergize our efforts and get the most bang for the buck with our different programs. We all have different end goals. For WashDOT, it's all about making sure someone can drive an electric vehicle along our major roadways and find charging along the way. For others, it might be about air quality or innovative battery storage, but we're all working together to get as much out there for the public as possible.
Great, thanks, Tonya. Yeah, I just it's a tangled web. It's exciting though. I do want to emphasize the kind of the other state agencies in Oregon we work with in environmental quality or land use agency and Department of Energy and a number of players. And the exciting thing is there's often streams of money from the federal sides to some of those different entities, and we're looking at opportunities to really pull together and find those synergies. So pretty exciting. There's a really great question in the chat, a topic that's often coming up a lot and really people are trying to be thoughtful about is the equity question and really looking at social equity. And as we think about how do we make sure that we're providing charging to low-income communities, to folks that live in multi-unit dwellings. And I thought I'd start with Lucy and then Andrew, and then I'm going to go to everybody on this question because I do think it's a pretty important question. Lucy, is that something that the Atlas study looked at, or something you've thought about from the policy perspective?
Yeah, we've definitely been thinking about that. I think it was one of the key takeaways when we look at that work from NREL suggesting that only half of folks will have easy access to home charging. For us, it was the kind of solutions there are around building codes and trying to make sure that new construction and also optimally retrofitting construction for EV ready charging is really important because it is most convenient and is going to be cheapest for folks to charge their cars at home. So we really do need to keep focused there. And I think because of the large number of EV drivers currently that have home charging, it tends to look like that will continue if you don't think about the future of the market and how it might shift as more people try and buy electric vehicles. So we really need to kind of think of the future adopter, not just today's early adopters, and figure out how we get charging to them in their homes or on street nearby. There's also like thoughts about, like Andrew mentioned, there's ways to use battery storage to try and keep the costs of public charging down and avoid demand charges from utilities so that public charging can be offered at the most cost effective and make sure that it remains cost effective with gasoline, right? Because that's one of the advantages to EVs that we're always talking about. So those are the two main routes we've been thinking about. I think also important is to engage communities early in thinking about installing public charging, figure out what they want, where they'd like to see it, rather than having them kind of come in at the end, which has happened all too often. So early engagement with the community is really important.
Yeah, very good points. Those are excellent. Andrew, thoughts from Electrify America's perspective or some of your own take?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with everything that Lucy said. In terms of who has adopted EVs early on, it's a lot of folks who have consistent off-street parking. They have a standalone home, they have a garage, they have a driveway, and so they're able to just plug in and charge there. But as time goes on, the profile of folks who are going to need charging is going to change more towards those who live in apartment buildings, live in row houses, rely on street parking. And there are income and ethnic disparities in home ownership and all those types of dynamics at play. So having cost-effective public charging is really critical towards making sure that everybody has the option to adopt these vehicles. And the demand charges that Lucy mentioned, these are the critical determining factor right now in DC fast charger economics. Where you have expensive demand charges, it is impossible to offer a electric rate that even that consumers will tolerate if you pass on the entire demand charge, let alone a rate that is competitive with what somebody who is lucky enough to be able to rely on home charging pays. So something that we've been advocating for very strongly around the country is highlighting the emerging equity issue here, that eventually we need to bring down commercial rates in terms of effective cost per kilowatt hour to roughly be the same as residential rates in cost per kilowatt hour. Even at present, we set our prices for electricity to be less than the equivalent cost of gasoline. So if you're used to driving a gasoline vehicle and you come in, you get an EV and you come and charge with us, you're going to get a little bit of a benefit relative to gasoline. But as Lucy's mentioning, we always highlight the benefit of the cost savings from electrification. And a lot of when you talk about it, you can save 70% or more on your fuel costs. Those are based on residential prices. So in the long term, there really is an equity issue here, and adjusting utility rates to allow those who rely on public charging to have the same cost benefits as those who can charge at home is a really important thing for us all to tackle.
Yeah, those are great points. So I'm going to whisper something I never do. I never say to my legislature or other, but we're looking at subsidies as a state DOT. And basically when I talk to my legislature about this, I say, we're offering the stopgap funding. So we're basically trying to make it pencil out for both either the utility, local jurisdiction, private charging company to come in and do the installation, because we're taking away basically the cost difference to make sure it's profitable, while also trying to buy down the long range cost of the charging to the users themselves, and really focusing on low income and BIPOC communities. So we're pretty excited about a new program to do that. We're also seeking a pretty significant grant to move that forward. But I do think, as we think about roles and responsibilities, that's a key role that state DOTs can play, is really trying to close that gap around the equity issues that do exist. So Candy, I'd love to hear your perspectives. Do you agree, disagree? And then what else do you want to throw in there?
I do agree. And it's walking a very fine line right now. We have had discussions in the background about getting in touch with the building codes and having those changed so that any building in the future is allowing for the possibility of car charging at new residential locations, not just single family homes, but multifamily homes. How it's important when you have so many renters within your area. For Las Vegas, for example, you have these large apartment complexes. You can't even have a charging station because you don't have necessarily a spot for them to put them. So it needs to be more of a bank. We're looking for ideas and ways to make that happen, not only what's currently on the ground, but what's coming out as well. There's building all around us, and we need to address it now until it just continues to build out, and then you're tearing up roads and pavement to make the utility available. So we're looking at it. We've discussed it in many meetings. We've talked to our legislation about it. A lot of them are on board, but there has yet to be a true final answer to the question. It's getting everybody in line with, this is truly what is coming and we need to prepare.
Yeah, I think the first step is often acknowledging the vision of where you're trying to get, the problems, and then how we start to address some of those things.
Another thing we were looking at, is to have what we would call charging banks, which would be centrally located at libraries or areas. Our director had thought that possibly the DMVs, we have so many DMVs throughout our state, that we would have a block of charging stations at locations like that. They're well lit parking lots, and the people, how do I even say this? there tends to be a lot of rental properties around our DMV areas. So if we could have the people that own the cars feel comfortable leaving their car at the DMV overnight while they're charging and walk to their home, it might be an opportunity as well. Just kind of tweaking it and thinking outside of the box a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And it's being creative about how to find those locations and be supportive. And I think the other thing, going back to the partnerships piece that we was talked about earlier, I think that's really the opportunity to work with local jurisdictions to set codes and ordinances on the charging requirements for multi-unit dwellings, especially any new areas that are built, to just make them ready. Tony, I'd love you to comment on this one as well. And then I'm going to shift to some things I'm seeing in the chat in terms of like, it's not only about the charging, there's also the equity issue of people getting the vehicles in the first place. So we'll pivot to that in a moment. So Tonya, please.
Yeah, actually, I was going to mention that as well. We've actually been working at WashDOT and our Puget Sound Clean Air Agency on looking at how we can do support communities of low income through a new grant program that we have that is for electric vehicle car sharing. And the research that we've done and all of the outreach and focus groups and surveys of different housing authorities and what they need has really shown that there's no cookie cutter approach that's going to work for every community. That really each community needs to be assessed on what their needs and goals are. And there are some communities that are in highly urban areas with a lot of public transportation and maybe speaking different languages. And there are some communities and housing authorities where it's senior citizens that maybe don't care to drive electric. So in some situations, the best result is having electric buses and shared rides, or in some communities, maybe more rural without access to public transportation, it might be having electric vehicles and charging at a housing authority where they can share the vehicle, or even have third party. Our King County Metro, the largest transit system in the Seattle area in our state, has 4 different programs going on that provide on-demand service that will get people door to transit stop, so they can get that first mile, last mile covered. So they'll actually go and pick someone up at their home and take them to a major transit center, or even to important events and medical appointments and shopping and things. So that like short shared rides, and then connecting with public transportation. And so another thing is that besides the charging infrastructure, there are ways to make it more affordable through sales tax exemptions. And in Washington State, we've had a sales tax exemption on the purchase of clean cars since 2009. And it's changed over the years to have a cap. So it's not, just for the high-end Teslas, but most recently it was expanded to include used vehicles, so might help as well. So there are states like in Oregon who have really extra rebates for people low income. And so some great programs around the nation, but it's really an emerging field. And but there are a lot of different things to look at. And one thing that we haven't really talked about on this particular panel is the medium and heavy duty vehicles, like the buses and the delivery trucks and different things. So there's going to be a lot of exciting things happening in the coming years, and equity is something that is top of mind for everything that we do.
Yeah, really great points. Couple thoughts emerged as you were talking there, Tonya, which is always exciting to get the juices flowing, right? One that I want to mention is, yeah, this panel has been pretty focused on light duty vehicle electrification, so electric cars. There certainly is a medium and heavy duty side, which is a big piece that we all need to be tackling. We didn't talk about much today. And then the other side is the micromobility. As we talk about electric bikes, electric scooters, we're seeing a huge boom in my state of electric bikes, and it really increases the range and the geographic areas, meaning hills, that people are willing to travel for some of those shorter trips. So a lot of opportunities there. I think circling back to the equity side, and as we think about I always call it the chicken and the egg conundrum, because do you have the charging or do you have the people with the vehicles that then create the demand for the charging? And seeing a lot of good studies out there that really say, you know, to gain that consumer confidence, you need the charging in place a couple of years before people are willing to adopt the vehicles themselves. And so I think that holds true for all demographics in all areas. And then in order to incentivize then all people being able to transition to electric, there is that cost barrier for many populations. And so whether that's through incentives, rebates, buybacks, there's a number of different tools that entities use. And I would also just flag the used EV market is one, and then applying rebates to some of those that just really kind of reduces that cost barrier. Anyone else want to weigh in on the kind of vehicle side of things and promoting that? Because we've talked a lot about the charging stations. Looks like Andrew, you unmuted, and then Lucy.
Sure. So I think that's exactly right. You mentioned that states have been expanding incentive programs to cover used vehicles or to provide an additional incentive for low-income drivers. And those are definitely some of the things that are necessary. You know, a lot of it also is just as the market develops, the used market for the EVs will become much more robust than it is. You can already get a used EV for usually a lower cost relative to a gasoline counterpart with the same mileage. With the reason being that the gasoline technology, you know, there's not so much difference between a Honda Accord made this year and one made last year, but the technology is evolving, the ranges are evolving so quickly on the EVs that they have not had the same high resale price, even at the same mileage, because they're now a couple years out of date. So that's one aspect of it. But another thing that we found is that there are so many layers of federal, state, sometimes utility incentives. Those can be very difficult to navigate for some drivers who might actually be able to get into an EV if they just knew how to take advantage of all the programs that are out there. So we've been working on a couple different programs to build incentive advisor tools to help connect drivers, including low-income drivers, moderate-income drivers, with all the funds that they are entitled to, with all the different grant opportunities for getting a charger for their home, for getting the vehicle. And that can be very helpful as well, having somebody to actually kind of shepherd them through the process, help them fill out the forms. Exactly. So those are some of the things that we've been working on, but it's a great question. And I think states and private companies are starting to figure out how to crack that nut.
Yeah, great. Good feedback. Thanks, Andrea. Lucy?
I just wanted to give a shout out to California, where I'm located, who just passed an e-bike incentive that's going to go into effect middle of next year. If folks are looking for someone to kind of chat with on that, because I think I bought one recently. It's fabulous technology. It's really cool to see that taking off. And also wanted to just give a shout out to Forth. For those who don't know the organization, they are spending a lot of time trying to figure out the pilots and strategies that work well for serving historically underserved communities and to getting EVs out there to everyone. So suggest connecting up with Forth and listening in on a number of their programs if you haven't already.
Yeah, those are great leads and connections. Thank you. So we're running short on time. I'll ask one more question and then do some closing for the session here. And the last question I saw here in the chat talking about state fleets. And so I'd love to hear, Tonya, maybe your thoughts on as the DOT thinks about fleets. Candy, I think you touched on that a little bit earlier, and then I'm going to turn it to you.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the Washington State Department of Transportation, we are transitioning our passenger vehicle fleet to electric. We have a nice variety. I think we are. I think we're doing really well on the passenger fleet conversions. Our governor has directed all of the state agencies to reach 100% electric vehicles in our state fleets. And so all of the fleet managers are working together on making that happen, including putting in charging. So WashDOT's put in charging at our office buildings for our fleets, for our visitors, and for our employees to use. We had funding through a state settlement with Volkswagen that provided funding to purchase 40 electric vehicles for state fleets. And the state agencies just had to put in the charging as their contribution. So yeah, we're definitely moving forward in that area and are excited to see the bigger medium duty vehicles. There's some vehicles like our snowplows that probably never can be electric, or at least not in the near future. But the ones that we are transitioning to electric.
Great. Yeah, exciting. It's a daunting task for DOT given all the funding things that we have, looking at the age of vehicles and turnover and how do we support it within our areas? How do we think about redundancy, especially if we're thinking beyond the light duty fleet and, if we have emergencies and things like that, what if the power goes down? How do we make sure vehicles get out to these needed areas? Candy, other thoughts?
So we're in our infancy as far as bringing in electric vehicles into our fleet. And like Tonia, the passenger fleet, we are currently purchasing cars. We're putting the specs together for the process of purchasing at least 5 this year, which is not a lot, but it's a start. So we're happy with that. And we have began looking at, while it's not electrical, it's still battery operated, hydrogen snowplows. So we are looking at different efforts to hit those large vehicles that we have within our fleet. I do know while NDOT is at the infancy, the city of Las Vegas their fleet is now electric. So we do have some of our RTCs that are looking at the electric options, whether it be buses or fleet cars. So the city of Las Vegas has the fleet cars. They have not transferred into the buses. They had a pilot that they were using, and due to the heat, there was a few issues. So we've kind of stepped back from that as a state, but they are still working with some pilots to see how they can overcome that. And then in the north, in Reno, they have buses and not their passenger cars. So we are looking at it as a state. We just haven't put all of our efforts into it as of yet, but it's coming down the pike.
Great. Well, I'm gonna have to follow up with you about the hydrogen snowplows. That sounds awesome and excited, and I want to totally talk about it more. So speaking of, I think that's the purpose of a lot of these kind of sessions that AASHTO hosts with the various DOTs is really hearing from others on what they're doing. So if someone from the audience, if something that one of the panelists said really piqued your interest, I encourage you to reach out to them, learn a little bit more. We are better together. So the more that we learn from one another, work collaboratively and cooperatively, the further we'll get towards our goals and objectives. So thank you, the electrification panel. Really appreciate your comments, thoughtful feedback. I think it was great to also have that more interactive kind of Q&A session. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting altogether by saying thank you for those of you that have been with us from the start or for the last little bit. We know that the most precious gift that you can give is your time, so thanks for sharing that with us today. Also, in addition to just contacting folks, if there was an interest of a topic, I also encourage you to join the AQCCES subcommittee and engage more with us on some of these and other important topics. And I think Phil put the link in the chat before, and we'll continue to work on these and many other important issues. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.